Hi, welcome back to our second video in the A Court of Silver Flames. I forgot the name of this book. We're on part 2, Blade. Is this the best part of the book? Maybe. It's pretty good. This whole book is good. I have a great time the whole time. I love Nesta Archeron. But this is also one of the longer parts in the book. I mean, it's a chunky book. It's a chunky book. She's a chunky girl. But I'm excited to talk about it. We get fun stuff. This is like female friendship core, girl power core. Let's jump into it. Should I give you the tiniest recap? Nesta Archeron has been locked in the House of Wind because she was being a rapscallion and running around town and spending all of Feyre and Rhys's money. She was spending all their money. They said, you have to stop spending our money. We're locking you in this house. You're not a prisoner, though. You can't get out unless you walk down 10,000 stairs, but you're not a prisoner. Don't be silly. She's up there. She has to train with Cassian, and we've just found out that Gwen, one of the priestesses who lives in the mountain in the library, is going to come and start training with her. Nesta and Cassian are both really nervous the next morning because Gwen is coming to training. They're like waiting for her. Gwen does arrive. She's feeling very scared, and Nesta can sense it because, it's the first time she's been outside in 2 years. Again, I think it's ridiculous. Build these girls a garden. Elaine, get on it. They need to have some outside time. It's important. And Gwen arrives and she says, I realized on the way up here that I don't have proper clothes. I suspect these won't be ideal because she's wearing like her priestess robes. And Cassian's like, don't worry about it. I can teach you in the robes if you wish, or we can find you different garments, like whatever you feel the most comfortable in. Cassian starts by having Nesta demonstrate the fighting stance that she has learned. And Gwen is actually pretty good at the initial footwork and grounding and balancing, because she explains that they did a similar sort of practices when she was a priestess. By the end of the lesson, Gwen's a little sweaty, and the girls go to get water and chat. Gwen explains that back at the temple where she was raised, they did a series of movements that were similar every sunrise, not for battle but to calm them. Nesta is why did you sign up for this then if you already have mind calming exercises that you are accustomed to? And Gwen says, I don't ever want to feel powerless again. And Nesta says, me too. Nesta that afternoon makes a quick trip over to Windhaven. She goes with Cassian to Windhaven. Cassian is meeting with Eris up at Windhaven, but Nesta leaves him because she needs to go shopping. She needs to meet up with her girl Emerie. It's much colder up at Windhaven than it was at House of Wind because Windhaven is up in the mountains. Emerie greets Nesta the moment she walks through the door. Emerie's like, it's good to see you. There is a creepy creeper. He's very drunk in there talking to Emerie, and clearly Emerie is quite uncomfortable with this man, and she is trying to get rid of him. Nesta steps up to the counter despite the creeper's complaints. His name is Bellius, we come to learn. Nesta says, I have an appointment, and you seem to need an appointment with a bath. He's stinky. And Bellius says, do you know who I am? Nesta says, a drunk wasting my time. Get out of here. He's been sent by his father to offer to buy the store, and Emerie's like, I still don't want to sell it to you. Bellius leaves, calling her a hateful witch with a B. He doesn't call her a witch. He does call her the B word, but we're not going to repeat it here. We're trying to keep things PG, or at least PG-13. The guy complains a little bit, heads to the door. Emerie explains that Bellius is her cousin, and he is especially arrogant because he is going to complete the blood rite that spring. He's not usually drunk during the day, she adds. Emerie says, our fathers are two of a kind. They believe children should be disciplined harshly for any infraction. There was little room for mercy or understanding. And Nesta says, I think I know the type. And Nesta's thinking about her own grandmother who had once beaten her palms raw for her missteps. Nesta had been the only one to endure their grandmother's cruelty because Nesta had been the oldest and their grandmother died when both the other girls were still quite young. But Nesta never left flowers at her grave. She said, not you, hateful woman. Nesta had only ever left flowers for her mother, whose grave she visited more often than she cared to admit. She hadn't once visited her father's grave outside of Valaris. Nesta checks in with Emerie to make sure she's going to be okay once Nesta leaves, that he won't come back and bother her. And Emerie says he won't come back. He lives a few hours away. Emerie comments that Nesta looks healthier than the last time she saw her, even though it's only been a couple weeks. Nesta says, we moved our training to Valaris. And Emerie says, I was about to write you. I asked about making leathers with fleece inside. It can be done, but it's not cheap. And Nesta says, then it's beyond my means, but thank you for finding out anyway. And Emerie says, I could order it and let you pay it off as you were able. Emerie's got Valaris' version of Afterpay. Unfortunately, Nesta has no money, at all. Nesta thinks about how no one had ever showed her that level of kindness, even when her and her family were quite poor and destitute. And she's thinking about Tomas. So there was something about Bellius that had kind of reminded her of Tomas. He had been angry, had pinned her to the wall and said, "You think you're better than me, acting like a queen when you haven't got anything?" She'd never forget the sound of her dress tearing, the greed in his eyes as he pawed at her skirts, trying to raise them as he fumbled with the buckle on his belt. Only pure, undiluted terror and survival instinct had saved her. She'd let him get close, let him think her strength had failed, and then clamped her teeth down on his ear and ripped. He'd screamed, but he'd loosened his grip on her, just enough that she'd broken free and scrambled through the snow, spitting his blood out of her mouth, and did not stop running until she reached the cottage. And then word had come of their father's ships, found with all that wealth intact. Nesta knew it was a lie. The trunks of jewels and gold had not come from that doomed shipment, but from Tamlin. Payment for the human woman he'd stolen away. To help the family he'd doomed to die without Feyre's hunting. So I'm glad we, know the Tomas story, that she, bit his ear. I'm a little bummed that she didn't kill him, honestly. And again, I hope she goes back. I hope he's not alive. That's my hope. I hope he's been murdered at this point. I do love that she bit his ear off. I think that's fun. I think Cassian would love that story. I hope she tells him. Emerie goes, "I'm about to take my lunch break. Would you care to join me?" Beyond Cassian, no one had invited her to dine in a long time. She'd given them no reason to. But there it was, an honest, simple offer from someone who had no idea how terrible she was. Having lunch with Emerie was an indulgence. It was only a matter of time until the female learned more about Nesta, until she heard every horrible thing, and then the invitations would stop. Had she been any better than Bellius, drunk and simmering with hatred for months, if Emerie knew that, she'd kick her out of the shop too. Oh, poor baby. My little love. This is so sad. It hurts my feelings that Nesta is truly is everyone knows that I'm a terrible bad person and I make everyone's life that I step into worse. And Emerie just hasn't been told yet. As soon as she's told, I don't think we'll be friends anymore. Sad. But Nesta's I would like that because she's excited. She's going to take advantage of this while she can. They go to this little back room where there's a kitchen area and a table set for one. And Nesta asks about it. And Emerie explains that there's no mate or no husband to bother her. And Nesta says, "Me either." And Emerie says, "What about the handsome General Cassian?" And Nesta says, "Not a chance." She has a little cold stew situation and Nesta thinks it's delish. And Emerie explains that she cooked it all herself. Emerie loves cooking. She has a little garden and she likes making stuff. Emerie says it's all in the spices, which are in short supply around here, unfortunately. Illyrians don't particularly know or care about them. And Nesta explains that her father used to be a merchant and he traded spices from all over the world. I can still remember the smell in his offices. It was 1,000 different personalities all crammed into one space. And she thinks about how Feyre used to love to spend time in their father's office. But Nesta hadn't thought that it was really acceptable to be interested in the trades as a wealthy young girl. So she had never really spent much time in there. Emerie asked, "Did you travel with him?" And Nesta says, "No. My sisters and I remained home. It wasn't appropriate for us to travel the world." Emerie asks if Nesta would have wanted to travel if given the option. And Nesta decides that, eventually she would have yielded to curiosity, even if she wouldn't have initially been on board with the idea. And Emerie asks if Nesta has any family left in the human realms. And Nesta explains that her parents are dead and her surviving family conveniently, forgot about them is the moment they were poor. So no, not really. Nesta had written letter after letter when they had fallen into poverty, begging her cousin Erston to take them in. They had gone unanswered. And then the money for postage had run out. The more I find out about, Nesta and what Nesta did during that, the time the Archerons lived in poverty, the more I'm guys, Nesta, really was trying. Everything she tried did fail. Okay? She wasn't good at it, but she was using, the tools that her mother had taught her to, try to lift them out of poverty. And, were they helpful? No, but, I truly don't think, Nesta couldn't have gone in the forest and hunted a wolf. It's just, she would have died. She was, writing letters to family. She was trying to, look on the relationships they had built with the social circle. She had been raised from the time she was young to believe that, that would be enough. That was what was to be done. And it didn't work. And that's not her on her, okay? Nesta tried. And she also thought her dad should try. Emerie kind of explains that she is all alone. Her mother died giving birth to her, and her brother died in a skirmish, and her father recently died in the war. And then she continues to say, "I do not bother with the rest of my kin. Although my father's family makes a point to try to claim the store and his wealth as their own, they believe a woman should not run it on her own, that I should wed a male in this village and leave the store to them." And then Emerie is I'm kind of bummed to hear that you won't be coming to Windhaven very often. It's really lovely to have another sensible person to talk to. And Nesta is "Would you move away from here if you could?" It seems like you don't really like it very much. Emerie explains she's never left the village. And Nesta sips on her tea and makes a face because it has more of a bite than she expected. And Emerie explains, "Tea is in short supply here, a luxury that I indulge, but to spread it out I add a little willow bark to it. It also helps with some of my pains. The wings sometimes hurt. The scars, I mean, like an old wound." And then Nesta makes a move to like help clear the table, and before she leaves, she invites Emerie to training. She says, the training I'm doing with Cassian in the House of Wind is open to anyone. Any female, I mean. Females who have experienced hardship. We train each morning from 9 to 11, though sometimes we run till noon. You're welcome to come. And Emerie says, I have no way of getting there, but I appreciate the offer. Someone could come and retrieve you and bring you back, Nesta offered. She wasn't sure who she was going to ask, but she's like, I would figure it out. I'll ask Rhys myself if I need to, which is like so brave of her. What a queenie. Emerie says it's a very generous offer, but I have my shop to run, and I'm not interested in a warrior's training. I doubt it would win me patrons in this town to have them know I'm doing such a thing. And Nesta says, you don't seem like a coward. And then she says to her, send word if you change your mind and wish to join us. The offer still stands. Meanwhile, Cassian is talking with Eris. Eris has never heard of the dread Trove either, but he doesn't think his father has, which is great news, because he's not looking for it. But also, he's like, I don't think Brylan really like fully trusts my father, so like I can't tell you whether she's looking for it or not. Eric asks about what Mor is up to in Valhalla, and Cassian pretends that she's asking about the Trove instead of what she's really doing, which is convincing the people of Valhalla to sign the treaty. And then Eris calls Cassian a mongrel bastard. He's the worst. He's the worst. Let's dump him off a cliff. Eris leaves, but Cassian is still cranky. Nesta's ready to leave when Cassian comes to get her in Rhys's mother's house, but Cassian, again, is still in a bad mood from hanging out with Eris. She's been less tired since she's not training in the library anymore. Instead of going to her bedroom, she heads to the dining room. Cassian is drinking a glass of wine, which disappears the moment she steps into the room because the house isn't supposed to allow alcohol in the room with her. And Nesta says, are you okay? Did something happen with the Trove or the Queens? And Cassian says, what? No, Eris was just his usual charming self today. And Nesta says, oh, okay. I asked Emerie to join training. Cassian says, I'm assuming she said no. She did. But if she changes her mind, I thought someone could winnow her here. Cassian's like, sure, we'd find someone. Like, he is still, like, fixated on whatever happened with Eris. And so she asks again, what happened? Cassian tells her about his meeting with Eris. And Nesta is confused because the info sounds like mostly good news. And Cassian says, I just hate Eris. Eris and his twisted word games and politics are an enemy I don't even know how to handle. Every time I meet with him, I feel like he's got the upper hand. Like, I can only catch up to him. And he sees through every fumbling attempt at being clever. Maybe that's what makes me a stupid brute after all. And Nesta's like, maybe Rhys should kill him. Love the idea. Cassian said if anyone's going to kill him, it'll be Mor or I, but killing him would prove him right about me. And he's better than Baron. Nesta hates how sad he is and how she has said similar things to Cassian before. Worse things, honestly. And Cassian is such a good man, and she just like, she loves his smile and like wishes he was happy. So she kisses his neck and then licks him. And when he pulls away, Nesta says, let me, please. She does drop to her knees into the table and take his pants off in the dining room. Dinner on the table. Pants are off. In the dining room, dinner on the table. Okay, great. Cassian finishes, and then he tells Nesta to take her pants off, and Nesta is ready to take her pants off, unfortunately, as does Loudly Cough from the hallway. He says, hi guys, I actually want to have dinner. Azrael walks into the room. Nesta pretty immediately, like, says goodnight and, like, pieces the heck out of there. And Cassian's like, thanks for that, Az. Rude. And Az says, I don't know what you're talking about. And Cassian calls him an a-hole. Az is like, don't show your hand all at once, Cass. Cassian's, what's that supposed to mean? Az nodded towards the doorway. Say something for later. Nesta's a little nervous to face Cassian at the training the next morning, but she's grateful to have Gwen there as a buffer. Gwen tried to look into the Dread Trove in the library for her, but besides a couple of mentions in an old text, they didn't really find anything, so it might be an impossible task to do research because she doesn't really know where to go from here. Gwen's like, is there really no other way of finding it? And Nesta says, nope, there's no other way. After training, Nesta talks to Cassian, still thinking about what happened the night before. They talk briefly about Gwen and how well she is doing. And Nesta says, I like her. And Cassian says, I don't think I've ever heard you say that about anyone. It's too bad the other priestesses won't come. And Nesta says, I just don't know what to do to encourage them. Cassian says, keep doing what you're doing. He has plans to head to Windhaven that afternoon to check on the Illyrians. And Nesta says, can you actually do me a favor while you're up there? And the favor that Nesta needs is she sends Cassian to go to Emerie's with a gift from Nesta from the house. The house provided spices and teas, a whole basket of them to bring to Emerie. Emerie is so grateful. And she's like, please tell Nesta I say thank you. And Cassian says, Nesta says you can thank her by showing up to training tomorrow morning. And Emerie says, I told her the other day I have no means to attend. Cassian says, she thought you'd say that. If you want to come, send word and one of us will bring you. If you can't stay the full time, that's fine. Come for an hour before your shop opens. Emerie says, it's not the right time right now. And Cassian says, if you ever change your mind, just let us know. Cassian's thinking about like Nesta's kindness to these women and how different she is with like Gwen and Emerie and just kind of all the women she's encountering currently than she is with her sisters and the rest of them. Had she gone into Valaris night after night, not only to distract and numb herself, but to be around people who didn't know the weight of all she carried? He's trying not to think about what happened the night before, but when he passes the gifts for Emerie from Nesta, he had just, like, wanted to kiss her. Ugh. And he just, like, doesn't know where they stand. Like, what are the vibes between him and Nesta? And the next morning, Nesta arrives at the trading ring, and Cassian is smiling because Gwen's there, but so is Emerie. Emerie's not really great at the balancing stuff because her wings really, like, throw off her balance. We kind of learned that because the muscles in her wings have been, like, atrophied from being clipped and being unable to be used, it really, like, throws off her balance because the weight is not properly able to be, like, adjusted through those, like, small muscles in her wings. Cassian asks, which of the healers clipped you? Emerie says, my father did it himself. I fought him, and so his work became even sloppier. I can't extend this one past here. That's all I can get on this side. Cassian says he deserved to die in that battle. Deserved to die a long time before that, Emerie. And Emerie said he deserved to die for far more than what he did to my wings. Cassian offers to bring Magda up to take a look, but Emerie declines the offer. Nesta interrupts and tells Cassian they need to start training since they only have an hour with Emerie. And Gwen says, do you have libraries in Illyria? And Emerie says, no, I've never been in one. And Gwen says, do you like to read? And Emerie says, I live up alone in the mountains. I have nothing to do with my spare time except work in my gardens and read whatever books I order through the mail service. And in the winter, I don't even have the distraction of the garden. So yes, I like to read. I cannot survive without reading. And Gwen says, what kind of books? And Emerie goes, romances. And Nesta's eyes light up because obviously she's a romance girly too. And they start talking about their favorite books. And Emerie promises to bring books for both girlies, a mild one for Gwen and a spicy one for Nesta, from her favorite author. Rhys arrives after exactly 1 hour to pick up Emerie, and Emerie bows, and Gwen is, like, clearly in awe of Rhys. Like, this is their high lord. Okay, this is, like, a big deal for them. Rhys says hello to Gwen, and then he just says, Nesta? And Nesta goes, Rhysand. And Cassian walks over to Nesta and slings an arm around her shoulders to kind of, like, cut some of the tension. This is very much, like, a protective move. Like, he's placing himself next to Nesta to try to, like, immediately diffuse the tension between Nesta and Rhys, because at any moment they do want to kill each other. And he says to Rhys, these ladies are going to hand you your ass in combat soon enough. Nesta can tell that Rhys doesn't like how close Cassian is to her, so Nesta leans into Cass a little closer. Obviously. Rhys knocks on her mental door. He's hello, he's here on the mental telly. She debated ignoring, but found herself opening a small door through the steel spiked barrier she kept around herself day and night. The door was essentially a peephole, and she allowed herself what she supposed was the equivalent of her mental face to peer through the dark, sparkling plain beyond. What? Rhys says, you are to treat Gwen with kindness and respect. And Nesta says, mind your business, and slams the mental door in his face. This is probably one of the most destructive things Rhysand could have done in this moment. He's been given no clue to, or like nothing that would point to the fact that Nesta is not being kind to Gwen. Like every update that Cassian has provided, I'm sure it talks about how like lovely Nesta is with Gwen. Like every update that Clotho would have provided is like Nesta is being like lovely with the priestesses. There's nothing to indicate that Nesta is being cruel to Gwen. And if like we didn't trust her to be kind to the priestesses, why would we have let her in the library? And I like talked about it in the last section in the last video. I think one of the most powerful things they do is have her work with these like really fragile women in the priestesses that are down in the library, because it allows Nesta to see herself to be like to rise above her like instincts to be like mean and to like find kindness, because these women like needed to be treated with like care and tenderness, and like she has been nothing but kind and gentle with Gwen, and for Rhys to like undercut that and to be like, I still see you as the monster and I like don't trust you with this like fragile thing is just like it's harmful, it's rude, it's not okay. Emerie is talking to Cassian, and Cassian just like can tell that Nesta's getting upset, and so he's just like stroking a thumb along Nesta's shoulder. She's not sure if he can like actually like kind of sense the convo between Rhys and her, or if he just knows the vibes are a little tense there. And Rhys is like, okay, Emerie, are you ready to get going? Emerie's grabbing her coat, and Nesta shrugs out from under Cassian's arm and goes to like chat with her before she leaves. Nesta is feeling a little bit bad about leaving Gwen with Cassian. They've been fine in training, and Cassian like never touches her, but Gwen like definitely stays far away from him, like super far, doesn't invite touch from Cassian. Nesta didn't want to think about what that was, what scars had been etched so deeply into Gwen that the two most trustworthy males in the entire land couldn't put her at ease. Nesta hates Rhysand, but she knows he's like a good man. She like would trust him with Gwen, no questions asked. He's a good man, even if he's annoying. And like I do think it's her right to find him annoying. That is her baby sister's husband who wants to be the boss of her. I don't think we give enough, attention to that dynamic, which just seems like it would be difficult. Nesta confirms that Emerie is planning to come back tomorrow, and she is. And then Nesta says, I had no idea that spices and tea were that convincing. It wasn't only the gift, but the reminder of what they mean. Emerie says, that there is a world beyond Windhaven, that I am too much of a coward to see it. And Nesta says, you are not a coward. And Emerie says, you said I was the other day. Nesta says, I spoke in anger. And Emerie says, you spoke the truth. I stayed awake that night thinking of it. And then you had Cassian deliver the spices and tea. And I realized that there is a world out there, a vast, vibrant world. Maybe these lessons will make me a little less scared of it. Obsessed. Meanwhile, Rhys and Cassian are also having a mental combo. And Rhys says, this is an interesting development. And Cassian says, hey, I could have really done without you giving Nesta that mental warning. That was uncalled for. And Rhys is like, how did you know I did that? And Cassian says, I noticed the way she tensed, and I know you well, brother. You saw Gwen and you thought the worst of Nesta. She has treated her and Emerie with nothing but kindness. And Rhys is like, that's what pissed you off? And Cassian says, I am pissed off that you can't seem to believe even one good thing about her. Was that necessary to bait her like that? And Rhys apologizes, and Cassian asks Rhys to give Nesta some space, maybe picking up and dropping Emerie off on the other end of the house. You guys are, not good together. And if we could just, create some space between you right now, especially as Nesta is, healing, that would be ideal. Rhys seems bothered by the fact that Cassian had the need to have an arm around Nesta's shoulder to restrain her, but Cassian is like, you are so volatile right now with Feyre's pregnancy that I just am not unwilling to risk Nesta getting a little too sassy with you. And Rhys is upset because he's like, I would never hurt someone that Feyre loved. No one believes you. You literally threatened to murder Nesta a week ago. Rhys and Nesta are to their core incredibly similar. These are the same people in different fonts. Yeah, they are. That's why they butt heads so fiercely. Rhys and Emerie head out, but before he leaves, Rhys comments that the house is stinky from adult activities. He says, wow, this house is pungent. Seems like you and Nesta have been having a good time. Rhys says, I told Az playing chaperone would be useless. Nesta heads out to the stairs, and the next time she does, she makes it to the 3,000th step. She'd woken up in the middle of the night because of that dream of her father. Neither of the boys had been at dinner that night, and she missed the company, and she wonders if they went to dinner at the river house, and she's sad that she's so terrible and vicious that she's not invited to these dinners anymore. She's thinking about how she needs to find the Dread Cove and scry to find it because she's failed at everything else, and so this is something that maybe she could do well. A glass of water appears on the steps, and then Nesta's chatting with the house about the books that Emerie recommends to her, and how Nesta will share the books that Emerie gives her with the house once she gets them from Emerie. And then the house gives her scrying stones while she's still in the staircase. And Nesta goes, I can't. And the house asks why, through a breeze coming through the tunnel. I don't know. Okay, it asks. And Nesta says, bad things happened the last time. The cauldron looked at me and took Elaine. I can't endure it, can't risk it, not even for this. But the house is disappointed, but it takes away the bones, and Nesta climbs back up the stairs. Cassian is at the river house having dinner. It is their monthly court dinner at the river house, except Feyre and Elaine have already gone to bed. Feyre is very sleepy as a pregnant girly. And Amren says, Nesta has to start looking for the Trove. And Cassian says, she has been looking, don't push her. Rhys is like, no, she has the priestesses researching for her. That hardly counts. The only one outside the Night Court who knows about the Dread Cove is Varian. He's not allowed to talk to Tarquin about it because Mr. Tarquin is still a little cranky about them stealing the Book of Breathings. So he's being left out. But they might talk to Helion about it soon. It is a last resort, but if Nesta won't scry, they might be forced to. And then they will ask Elaine. They'll ask Elaine before they go to Helion and look into his library. Okay, and then I'm going to read you this passage that made me go, okay, you ready? Elaine had already departed with Feyre, claiming she had to be up with the dawn to tend to an elderly fairy's garden. Cassian didn't exactly know why he suspected that this wasn't true. There had been some tightness in Elaine's face as she had said it. Normally when she made such excuses, Lucian was around, but the male remained in the human lands with Jurian and Vasa. What is she up to? Are we just supposed to be getting vibes from Asriel? Because I'm kind of over the Elaine vibes, as I've talked about. I want her to be scheming. I need a scheme. I get bored if we don't have schemes. I hope Elaine is doing something fun and interesting and schemey. Anyway, Cassian goes on to say, Nesta will do it to prevent Elaine from putting herself at risk, but you have to understand that Nesta was deeply affected by what happened during the war. Elaine was taken by the cauldron after she scried. You can't blame her for hesitating. And Amren says, we do not have time to wait for Nesta to decide. I say we approach Elaine tomorrow. Better to have both of them working on it. And Az says, there is an innate darkness to the Dread Trove that Elaine should not be exposed to. And Cassian's like, but Nesta should? And I do think this like brings up one of my major issues with the Nesta hate, which is that like Nesta is trying. Is she often failing? Yes. Is she often mean? Yes. But like she is trying in a lot of ways. She like was quite helpful during the war. She's trying now. And Elaine kind of like sits around and does nothing and is like declared the saint, while Nesta, trying her best, doing kind of a bad job, but like trying her best, is often declared the villain. I don't like it. I don't like the dynamic. And Amren says Nesta has one more week to find the Trove with her own methods, or we bring in Elaine, who is more than capable of defending herself against the darkness of the Trove, if she chooses to. Do not underestimate her. Cassian says it's not right to wield Elaine as a threat to manipulate Nesta into scrying. And Amren says, we are on the cusp of another war. If we let the cauldron slip from our hands in the last one and it nearly cost us everything, we must head off this potential disaster before we lose the advantage. If we need to manipulate Nesta into scrying, even using Elaine against her, then we will do what is necessary. Cassian says, I don't like it. And Amren says, you don't have to like it. You just have to shut up and do as you're told. Amren is nasty. Why is Amren allowed to be nasty and no one makes her go live in the House of Winds? And Varian and Rhys are like, Amren, be nice. And Amren just rolls her eyes and goes, Nesta has 1 week. Emerie comes to the next 3 days of training. Gwen has already caught up to Nesta in terms of their progress, but Emerie needs more practice. She's struggling a little bit more. So Cassian's been working directly with Emerie while Nesta and Gwen partner up to train. Nesta has been loving the books that Emerie has been given her. Gwen has gotten the less spicy one, but she was still like shocked and appalled at the contents. Girly is not read a spice scene before. And now Emerie is like staying the full length of their lessons. She's like, you know what? The traffic at the store is slow enough to like miss out on the morning. Nesta normally doesn't see Gwen in the library anymore because she's busier in the afternoons since she takes the mornings off to train. But this afternoon, Gwen runs up to Nesta frantically because Meryl has found out that Nesta swapped those books like weeks ago. Nesta goes, who cares? I am not going to let her scare me off like some errant child. And Gwen's like, no, you don't understand. When she's in a fury. And then Meryl appears. What is it, Gwyneth Badera? When I'm in a fury, it is what? Gwen says, I meant nothing by it. And Meryl goes, I do not appreciate liars and thieves. And Nesta says, neither do I. And Meryl is annoyed that Nesta tried to cover for Gwen and tried to make a fool of her in her office. And Nesta says, who cares? Are you so bored down there that you have to invent these dramas to entertain yourself? I'm busy. And someone gasps on another level of the library as Nesta says this to Gwen, or to Meryl. Meryl says, do you not know who I am, girl? And Nesta says, I know that you are keeping us from our work, and I know that this is a library, but you hoard books like it is your personal collection. And Meryl says, you think I do not know you, the human girl who was shoved into the cauldron and came out high fae, the female who slew the king of Hybern and held up his head like a trophy as his blood rained upon her. The wind whispers to me, even here, under so much stone, and murmurs the goings-on of the world in my ear. Do you think you are entitled to do as you please now? And Nesta can like feel her power rising up at like the anger she feels at this woman. And she says, I think you talk like you to hear yourselves talk too much. And then Meryl says, I am a descendant of the Rabath, the lord of the western wind. Unlike Gwyneth Badara, I am no lackey to be dismissed. And Nesta thinks to herself, to hell with this witch, to hell with restraint and hiding. Nesta let enough of her power simmer to the surface that she knew her own eyes glowed. Let it crackle, even as she ignored its wild, unholy bellowing. Gwen backs away a step at Nesta's silver flames, and Meryl seems startled. And Nesta says, with a fancy title like that, surely such a petty grudge should be beneath you. And then Meryl says, get back to work, nymph. And then she leaves. Nesta asks, as once Meryl's gone, Gwen about like why Meryl called her a nymph, and Gwen explains that her grandmother was a river nymph, so she's a quarter river nymph, and it's why her eyes are like bright blue, and also why her bones are more flexible. Okay. Her mother wasn't wanted in the autumn court or with the river nymphs because she was half and half, and so she was given to the temple in Sangreva. She participated in the rite when she was of age, which is how Gwen and her sister were born, like the spring rite, you know, when Tamlin like bit Favor on the neck. She doesn't know who her dad was, but she was raised in the temple, never leaving the temple grounds until she came here. While Gwen doesn't say it, it's clear that Gwen's sister and mother were killed by Hybern. Gwen says, my sister had the webbed fingers of the nymphs. I don't. Meryl will make your life a living hell, you know. And Nesta says she can try. It'll be difficult to make my life any worse. And Gwen says, Meryl won't forget this, but neither will the other priestesses. No one stands up to her. And Nesta says, anytime you need someone to knock down Meryl a few pegs, let me know. And Gwen says, next time, perhaps I'll have the courage to do it myself. It seems that the priestesses haven't forgotten what Nesta had done, because the next morning, while Cassian and the girlies are going through their morning stretches, 3 priestesses walk in holding hands into the training ring, and Gwen smiles so big when she sees them, and Nesta is struck by how beautiful Gwen is when she's smiling. Cassian welcomes them, and then we have the first of them, Deidre, lowers her hood, and she has this huge scar across her entire face and another big scar on her neck. She says to Cassian, "We hope we are not too late." And they look to Nesta, not Cassian, for confirmation of this. And Cassian shrugs as Nesta is startled by the fact that they're looking at her. And he says, "I'm just the instructor here." And Nesta says, "We were just getting started." Nesta brings Cassian with her to the private library. She brought him in there after her work in the big library, just in case she can't see, she's not in her body when she scries, and she points to where things need to be. She needs someone to keep an eye on her. She asks the house for stones and bones, and Cassian is kind of surprised by how eagerly the house seems to listen to her. And Cassian says, "Why did you change your mind?" Nesta says, "I couldn't stop thinking about those priestesses who came to practice today. Rosalind said she hadn't stepped foot outside in 60 years. And Deidre with those scars. I'm asking them to be brave, to work hard, to face their fears, and yet I am not doing the same." Cassian says, "No one's accused you of that." Nesta says, "I don't need anyone to say it. I know it. And I might fear this scrying, but I fear being a cowardly hypocrite even more." Cassian asks if she wants Rhys or Amren to be there, and Nesta says, "I don't need them." Nesta closes her eyes and tries to focus on her breathing. She's thinking about all the ways and the people she's failed, but she knows, she can do this. And Cassian says, "Anything?" And Nesta says, "Don't talk." Cassian scoots a little closer, and she asks where the Dread Cove is, but there are too many thoughts, and so she starts with the mask. She asks where the mask is. She's scared that the mask is going to see her in the same way that the cauldron had seen her, but there's no tug, and the stones and bones don't move. There's nothing. She tries to find the cauldron instead, still nothing. She's tapping into her memories of the cauldron, trying to remember how it felt to be inside of it, and Cassian is calling her name as her hands start to kind of shake at the memory. And Nesta opens her eyes, and she's like, I can't. The power, I don't think I have it anymore." Cassian says, "It's there. I have seen it in your eyes, felt it in my bones. Try again." But she can't face the cauldron again. She says, I can't. She drops the stones and bones back into the dish, and she can't endure the disappointment in Cassian's voice when he says to her, "Okay." And she goes straight to bed. That night, Nesta dreams of the cauldron. It's searching for her through the House of Wind. She can see it moving through the hallways. She can feel the darkness crawling towards her, but she can't move, can't open her eyes. The darkness slithers into her bed, and Nesta starts screaming as it goes into her body, tearing her apart from the inside out. Cassian immediately wakes up. He reaches for his knife, and he has a bad feeling. Even though he didn't hear anything and didn't have a nightmare, he just has this a tug of dread, and his siphons are glowing. He doesn't have all of his siphons on, he just sleeps with one on, but it's glowing. The room is ice cold, and the lamps start to flare as if the house is begging for him to get up and run. He leaps out of bed and starts running in his underwear. As his door opens a moment later, they're sprinting down the hallway toward Nesta's door when they hear her scream. The door is open, and a silver light is coming from inside. Az tries to warn Cassian to be careful, but he just pushes past Az, moving faster than he'd ever moved in his life. Nesta is completely bathed in silver flames. The fire radiates cold. This isn't a power that he's ever heard of, and she's screaming, arching off the bed, clearly in pain. And Azriel goes, "Holy gods." Cassian lunges for Nesta, but Az holds him back. Cassian is snarling, trying to break free from Azriel, but Az has got him tight. And Nesta starts screaming, "No, no, no." And the fire sucks in as if on an inhale, if it's ready to explode back out of her again. But then the windows of the room burst, and Rhys comes in, and he smothers her flames with his darkness. Nesta's screaming in pain, and Rhys is like, Nesta, this is a dream." Their darkness and silver flames kind of battle back and forth, and Rhys shouts again in his high lord voice, kind of commanding, wake up, it's a dream, wake up." Cassian says, let me go right now. And this time Az does, and Cassian walks right into the heart of the flames and the darkness. And Cassian is like, Nesta. He looks at Rhys, and it's clear that Rhys is not in his body. He's gone into Nesta's mind. And slowly the flames vanish. Nesta's body relaxes back into unconsciousness, and the boys head into the sitting room that's right next door to Nesta's room. Cassian's asked if they should send for Feyre, but Rhys is like, absolutely not. I don't want her anywhere near that. And Az says, "Was that Nesta's true power? The silver fire?" And Rhys says, "Only the surface of it. I went into her nightmare. Why didn't you tell me she attempted scrying today?" And Cassian said, "Well, it didn't work." And Cassian didn't want to embarrass her. Rhys says, "The scrying was the tripwire for the memories. I caught that as I went in. She was dreaming of the cauldron, of when she went in. I saw it and felt it, everything that happened within that cauldron. Saw her take its power with her teeth and claws and rage, and I felt what it took from her." And Rhys says, "I guessed as much, but it was different to feel it, to feel what it had been like to be in that cauldron." And Az is like, "What is her power?" And Rhys says, "Death. Pure death." The dream had been real and not real. There had been no end to it, no escape, until a familiar male voice had said her name. And the terror had stopped, as if the axis of the world had shifted towards that voice which became a doorway, full of light and strength. Nesta had reached a hand towards it. And then there had been another male voice in her mind, and this one had been familiar as well, full of power, but it had been kind in a way she had never heard the voice to be to her. And it had eased her from that black pit of the dream, leading her with a star-flecked hand back to a land of drifting clouds and rolling hills under a bright moon. She had curled up on one of those hills, safe and guarded in the moonlight, and slept. When Nesta finally does wake up, the sun is shining through her window, and Cassian is asleep in a chair by her bed. She realizes that it had been a nightmare, and she just watches Cassian for a while. Like a knight guarding his lady, she couldn't stop the image, sprung from the pages of her childhood books, like a warrior prince with those tattoos and that muscle-bound chest. Her throat tightened unbearably, her eyes stinging. She would not let herself cry. Not for herself, or for the sight of him keeping watch at her bed all night. Cassian wakes up and he looks at her with so much worry, she has to work hard not to cry. The next morning, Emerie's like, Nesta, you look terrible. Meanwhile, Cassian is working with Rosalind, one of the new priestesses, and Nesta explains that it was bad dreams. And Gwen says, do you have them often? And Nesta goes, yeah. And Gwen says, me too. Some nights I need a sleeping potion from our healer to knock me out. Emerie hadn't been told about the priestesses, but Nesta assumed that she figured it out on her own, based on the way they acted around Cassian and the scars and everything. Emerie says to Nesta, what did you dream about? And Nesta says, I dreamed of the cauldron and what it did to me. Gwen says, I dream of my past too. And Nesta feels a little bit lighter after sharing this with the girls and having them share some of their hardships back. There is just a lateness to that sharing of their sufferings. Cassian heads to Rhys's office that afternoon. They're talking, and Rhys is clearly not doing well. He's clearly upset. And Rhys is Cassian is what's up with you? And Rhys goes, the baby has wings. And initially Cass is so excited as Rhys confirms that Magda had sensed it. Feyre had been in her Illyrian form when the boy was conceived. So he will be 3/4 Illyrian essentially. And Cassian says, but she doesn't have the wings right now. And Rhys says, she shifted back before we know. Cassian's okay, well, so put her back in Illyrian form to bear the babe. Magda had put a ban on any more shape-shifting, we learn. She says that to alter Feyre's body in any way right now could put the baby at risk. On the chance that it would be bad for the baby, Feyre is forbidden to do so much as change the color of her hair until after the birth. And Cassian says, I see, but it'll be all right. It's not that bad. And Rhys is it'll be bad. He's freaking out. Cassian's you need to take a breath. You need to fight. Do you need to fight it out? Do we need to go tussle? So you can work out some of this nervous energy. And Azriel walks in and he's tell us what you need, Rhys. And Rhys says nothing. I need not to fall apart so my mate doesn't pick up a whiff of this when she comes home for lunch. No one says a word about this to Feyre. No one. And Az is wait, didn't Magda warn her? And Rhys says, not strongly. She only mentioned an elevated risk during labor. And Az is I know that it isn't great timing, but we also need to talk about the fact that people Eris and Tamlin are going to find out about that Feyre is pregnant pretty soon. And we do need to have a plan on how we're going to deal with that. I totally get that. And as my love, I totally understand that this is a strategy meeting would maybe strategically be a good time to chat. But I don't think Rhys is just in the headspace to have this conversation in the current moment, maybe bring it up tomorrow. But Rhys pushes on. He says, Eris is our ally, and I don't think he'll really care that much. And F. Tamlin, if he tries to come over here, I'll kill him. And Cassian's for sure. But also, we kind of need Tamlin not to totally fall apart if we are about to enter another war. It'll be helpful to have him in a good state of mind. And Az is yeah, we're going to have to tell Lucien and have Lucien deliver the news to Tamlin. So he can kind of deal with the spring court and the aftermath, the damages that will surely happen from there. Rhys says, the idea of coddling Tamlin makes me want to shatter the window. And Azriel says, I'll take care of it. Cassian loops an arm around Rhys's shoulders and says, let's go get bloodied up. Let's talk for a moment about one of the biggest topics of conversation in this book. And that is the choice that Rhys makes to not tell Feyre about the fact that essentially she's got a really, really, really scary, probably gonna die situation happening in her womb. First of all, I think it's low-key kind of crazy that Magda didn't say anything. I do think the responsibility really does fall on Magda here, real villain of the situation. I think Feyre's doctor should have told her directly. It's kind of crazy that she's allowing the husband to make this kind of choice. Also, so maybe, besties, we shouldn't have tried to get pregnant at the age of freshly 21, maybe we should have spent, I don't know, 10 seconds like doing a little research into what a pregnancy risk would look like for a shifter, especially since Rhys knows as a half Illyrian, like there is like a chance of wings and that being like risky to a high fae pregnancy. Like you wouldn't think you would do a little research ahead of time. Maybe we were a little hasty. Maybe since we're going to live to like 2000, we could have spent 1 year doing research on this situation. Either have Feyre not be Illyrian or just like stay in Illyrian form all the time. Like if Illyrian women have like a more flexible pelvis or whatever to allow for wings to come through, which I think is kind of the vibes. Maybe just like once she's trying to get pregnant, she's just in Illyrian form now. I don't know. Like there could have been solutions that we could have come to if we didn't so hastily try to get a girly knocked up. Also, I have a slightly controversial take here, and it's not... because I think that, like, normal take is, like, Rhys was wrong here. And I am not saying he's not wrong. But I also love being lied to. Hold on. Not all the time. By people who know me, like, really well. If the situation is incredibly stressful and there's nothing I can do about it. I was trying to, like, think of times in which I like being lied to about certain situations. Let's say maybe there's, like, a spider. There's a spider. It's right by the bed. There's a spider. It's on my pillow. Upsetting. We go to catch it. We don't catch it, it runs away down the wall behind my bed. And the person I'm with is like, we got it. Yeah, I mean, that maybe after a while of looking, being like, oh, we got it, you're good. Maybe I appreciate that more than like being like, the spider is gone, now we are just going to have to sleep with the spider. Because like at this point, there's nothing we can do about the spider. And like, I would rather sleep in my bed and be like a little bit lied to. You know, if like I already ate a yogurt and it was expired and I ask you to look in the trash and see if it was expired. And I'm like, no, it doesn't expire for like 3 more days. I'll be like, oh, good. You know, as someone who's like a chronic worrier, like sometimes a lie to make me not spiral is like a kindness. Is this that situation? Not entirely. But I can't blame Rhys for like maybe taking a couple weeks. Like, from the time they find out to the time that Feyre finds out, it doesn't actually seem to be that long. Like, I think it's less than a month of him, like, trying to figure out a solution. Because he wants to be able to, like, come to her and be like, hey, so we're in a high-risk situation, but I found a solution. Like, I don't think he's planning to never tell her. He just isn't going to tell her yet. And I just think that's not the craziest thing Rhys has ever done. Do I think it's crazy that he's telling literally everyone? A little. The fact that everybody knows except Feyre, kind of mean. I mean, right now I think it's just the boys and Rhys, but like it'll become everyone. I'm unwilling to like totally condemn him for this choice. Do I think it's the best choice? Maybe not. But also like I don't think it's totally like evil. I think he means well. That night, Nesta is sitting at the dining table when Cassian comes in, limping with a black eye and a split lip. And Nesta's like, what happened? And Cassian's like, I sparred with Rhys. You should see him. And Nesta's like, why did you guys fight like that? Like, she saw Az in Cassian spar, and, like, neither of them look like that. So she knows this is different. Cass is like, he needed to get something out of his system. Despite that smooth exterior, my brother presents to the world. He needs to let loose every now and again, just to release some tension. And Nesta says, about what? And Cassian says, the baby has wings. Okay, this is actually the choice that I find unconscionable from Cassian. Cassian needs to learn how to lie a little bit. There is no reason he should have told Nesta. Not a reason on this earth that he should have told Nesta. Because there's nothing Nesta's going to be able to do to help her sister. He explains that, like, Magda can tell when the baby is in the womb. And Nesta's confused because she's like, I thought you guys would be pumped. Like, having wings kind of sounds fun. Cassian explains they, like, would be so excited for Rhys to have a kid that has wings. Because, like, that'd be fun. But unfortunately, when Feyre gives birth, the baby will probably kill her because the wings will get stuck in her birth canal and both her and the baby will probably die. And then there is some more hand waving. This doesn't make sense in the world, okay? Doesn't make sense that Cassian can be completely, like, disemboweled, like, guts out of his body. And they can fix that up right as he's right as rain. But Feyre can't have a C-section? No. That's okay. And look at me in my eyes when I say this. I don't care. I don't care. I think it's fun. Actually... This reminded me, I like made a whole video about Silver Flames literal years ago after I read it for the first time. It is like a really old video, so if you go back and watch it, do know that. Also, I touch my hair in that video constantly, which like I still do quite often, but I don't know. That was like a lot of hair touching. If that bothers you, don't watch it. But I think I did make some interesting points, most relevant of which is that I kind of talked about Silver Flames as like a work of fan fiction. It's like essentially Sarah J. Maas writing fan fiction of her own book to some respects. And I think that is really relevant to this conversation because to me, it really seems that this world was constructed to tell Feyre's story. And then when Sarah figured out she wanted to tell Nesta's story as well, the world isn't constructed to tell Nesta's story. Like when Sarah was writing ACOTAR, she was also building the world at the same time. And the world was built in a way that it lends itself to Feyre's story, and it is just like not built in the same way to lend itself to Nesta's story. So she has to like bend the rules of her own world a lot. And I think that's fine, but I do think it's like interesting to note. Anyway, back to the book. Nesta says, is Feyre distraught? And Cassian says she doesn't know the full scope of it, but all of us who have grown up here know what it means for a high fae female to bear a baby with wings. And Nesta suggests that maybe another court will know something about winged births, and Cassian tells her that Rhys and more are already looking into it. Cassian says if there is a way to save Feyre from a death sentence, Rhys will find it. He will stop at nothing until he figures out a way to spare her. And Nesta says, I'll try scrying again. And Cassian says after last night, she lifted her chin, as if that babe survived, Nesta would not allow him to be born into a world once more plunged into war. But she didn't say that. Couldn't open herself up like that. I need to regain my strength after yesterday's attempt. We will do it tomorrow night. And Cassian says, I want Rhys and Amren and Az there. And Nesta says, that's fine. Then the vibes kind of like shift to be flirty. And Cassian says, why haven't you sought me out? And Nesta says, why haven't you sought me out? And Cassian says, I am taking my cues from you. I didn't hurt you, did I? And Nesta says, no. I loved it. Cassian's like, I'd like to sleep with you on every surface in this house. So subtle wasn't working, so let's go and be straight to the point. I want to sleep with you everywhere. Nesta gets up and kisses Cassian on the mouth and says, I have no interest in betting a male who looks like he's been in a tavern brawl. She says, you look terrible. Cassian says, we can dim the lights. You don't have to look at me. But Nesta's saving him as a reward for scrying. And so she tells him, when you're healed and looking pretty again, then we will go wherever you please in this house. And Cassian says, deal. Nesta is scrying at the river house this time, so everyone can be there. Feyre's there, and Nesta gives her a little nod, and Feyre seems like really relieved that Nesta is being like civil with her. Nesta mentally tells Rhys that she won't say anything to Feyre. This is crazy to me. It as I explained, I do think it kind of makes sense for Rhys not to tell Feyre. Is it the best choice? No, but I do think it's an understandable choice. I actually think it's less of an understandable choice for Nesta not to tell Feyre. If I was given this information to either of my sisters, I would tell them. Obviously. It's kind of crazy to me that she doesn't have that much loyalty to Feyre. It's crazy that everyone in this room, actually I don't know if Amren knows. I don't know if Amren knows. Amren will know by the end of this. I think everyone in this room knows that Feyre has a death sentence inside of her right now, except Feyre. Crazy. And then anyway, back to the scrying. Nesta looks at Amren and she thinks about what she told her. You have become a pathetic waste of life. And Nesta says, okay, let's be quick about this. Az and Amren ask her about what happened last time, and she explains what she was thinking about when it happened last time. And Feyre assures her that Elaine is warded and guarded by some of Azriel's shadows, so she is safe. She trusts Az, and so she starts. Cassian at her side. She starts and eases herself into the darkness, reaching for Cassian's hand. Where is the mask? She whispers into the darkness. But she can feel Cassian's hand tighten on hers. That was the way back. Nothing could trap her here if she had a way home. This hit me in the heart a little bit, because she does talk about in this book a couple times how she's never really felt at home anywhere, and do have this sense that Cassian will guide her home. Makes my heart hurt in a good way. Cassian's watching Nesta, who's been scrying for a couple minutes now, and Amren's like, where is she wandering to? Nesta's hands have gone cold. In fact, the whole room is cold now. It's so cold you can see their breaths. Nesta starts to clench up, her brow furrowing, and Amren says, if you see the mask, now would be the time to let go. And Feyre says, Nesta, open your hand. Last time Feyre had gone into her head to pull her out, but obviously it would be really dangerous now. And also, Nesta didn't lower her shields before she started scrying, because she was afraid that the cauldron would come through her again, and so she has her shield up. And her shields are made of solid iron. No fairy magic can break them, according to Amren. And Cassian says, give her time. He knows that Nesta is not afraid. And Feyre says, I don't like this. Wherever she is, it feels deadly. And Cassian says, go get her, Rhys, right now. Go get her. I love how fast Cassian changes his tone. He's like, she'll be fine. She's not afraid. And then Feyre's like, seems dangerous where she is. And Cassian's like, get her out. What are you guys doing? Why did it take you so long? And Rhys is like, I can't. The doors of her mind are locked tight. And Feyre's like, she doesn't want it seeing her or us. She's locked it out, but she has also locked herself in. And then Cassian says to Nesta, Nesta, open your hand and come back. Nesta's eyes are open now, but they're filled with those silver fire. Rhys shoves Feyre behind him. Feyre shoves him back and then he goes back to standing next to him. She's like, stop. Nesta continues to hold Cassian's hand, and he sends a little bite of his power into her skin, and she turns towards him. Death watched him, but Death had walked beside him every day of his life, so Cassian stroked his thumb along her palm and said, "Hello, Ness." I love this moment so much. Maybe after the moment of which he says, when she was still human, the first time he saw her, she was still human, and he nearly went to his knees before her. This one is also one I just adore. I adore. Hello, Ness. Just so sweet. Also, I pulled a quote from Tower of Dawn. It's redacted. I've taken all names out in places to not spoil anything, because I would never spoil a Throne of Glass book in an ACOTAR recap video, because Throne of Glass is my love of my life, and I would never take that experience away from anyone. So I'm gonna hope you enjoy this redacted Tower of Dawn quote. "She frightens everyone, but not him. I think that's why she fell in love with him. Against her best intentions, he beheld all that she was and is, and he was not afraid." Again, I do think this is one of Sarah J. Maas's favorite kind of themes that she likes to explore in her book. This idea of women having access to power, and the men who love them seeing that power and not being frightened by it. And I think we see that with Cassian and Nesta here. Cassian says to Nesta, "Let go of the stones and bones, and then you and I can play." And he allows himself to kind of remember the kiss and the flirting, and kind of allows that kind of flirty vibes to penetrate through Nesta. Everyone leans in as Cassian kisses her on the mouth with tongue, which feels a little weird since she's not really in her body and she's standing in this room of people, but whatever. He's trying to give his warmth to Nesta, and he said, "Let go, Nesta." Nesta immediately comes back into her body and immediately stops kissing him because inappropriate for this moment. And Rhys says, "What the hell did you do to pull her out of that?" And Cassian says, "The only thing I could think of." Rhys says, "You warmed up the entire room." Cassian says, "I didn't mean to." And Feyre is looking at the map where Nesta has dropped the stones and bones, and we learn that the mask is at the Bog of Oorid. Amren explains that warriors were laid to rest in its night black waters, but Oorid changed to a place of darkness filled with such an evil that no one will venture there, and only the worst of the Fae are drawn to it. They say that under the water there flows to under the mountain, and the creatures who live in the bog have long since used its underground waterways to travel through the middle, even into the mountains of the surrounding courts. And Feyre's like, "Can't we get a more specific answer here? Do we have a detailed map of the middle?" And Rhys says, "It is forbidden to map the middle beyond the big landmarks that can be seen from the air. The middle is a place where wild magic still dwells and thrives and feeds. We respect it as its own entity, and we do not wish to provoke its wrath by revealing its mysteries." And Feyre says, "That's where the Weaver lived. You will need to be armed." And Cassian says, "We will be armed to the teeth. Do not worry." And Nesta says, "We will go tomorrow." And Feyre's like, "Don't you guys need time to prepare?" And Nesta says, "We will go tomorrow." Cassian says, "Okay, we'll leave after breakfast." And Rhys is like, "I should go with you." And Feyre's like, "I should go with you." The next day, they're getting ready to go to the bog. And both Feyre and Rhys are like, "We should go." But obviously, Feyre can't go, and nobody wants Rhys there. Cassian had given Nesta a bunch of weapons before they left House of Wind, and he says to her, "You're still as likely to hurt yourself as you are an opponent." But then he had he had strapped all sorts of weapons to her. She's armed to the teeth. Rhys is like, "We should both go with you, but at least you'll have Az." Cassian teases them for acting like mother hens. Elaine won't come out of her room while Nesta's over. She still doesn't want to see Nesta. Rhys tries to offer Nesta an out, but Nesta's like, "They will not be able to find the mask without my gifts." She kind of has to go. And Feyre says, "The middle is like nothing you've experienced before, Nesta. Don't let your guard down, not even for a moment." Nesta nods, not bothering to say that she had operated by that principle for a long time. Then Az winnows them away. They arrive at the bog, and the vibes are pretty bad. They're not good. It's just dead trees and black water. There's nothing alive, no insects, no birds. And Nesta's like, "Who would bury their dead here? I'd rather be burned to ash and left to the wind than to be buried here." And Cassian says, "Okay, noted." And Az explains this is an evil place. Nesta asks what sort of creatures live there. She didn't want to ask before because she didn't want to get freaked out. Cassian explains there used to be Kelpie, who are these shape shifters who lived in the water. They would lure people into the water and drown them and then eat them, but no one has seen them in ages. But they all might just be hidden here. We don't know. And Az says, "Just stay out of the water and you should be fine." And Nesta says, "What if the mask is in the water?" And Cassian says, "Then Az and I will draw straws like the tough warriors we are, then the loser will go in. Oorid's beauty awaits, my lady." They start flying around the bog, and Nesta's like, "I'm not exactly sure what I'm looking for." And Cassian's like, "Just keep your senses open." And Nesta says, "It's unbearable." Cassian's like, "We'll stay as long as we can, and if we can't find it, we'll just come back tomorrow." And Nesta says, "What other creatures live here?" Witches, Cassian says, not the human kind, the kind that used to be something else, and then their thirst for magic and power turned them into wretched creatures, banished here by various high lords. And Nesta says, they don't sound so bad. My Christmas wish for Sarah J. Maas, if Sarah J. Maas wanted to know what to get me for Christmas, it would be to let my girl Nesta Archeron, I want my girl Nesta Archeron to hang out with some witches with iron teeth. It would be so fun. Wouldn't it be fun? It would be fun. Cassian says they drink young blood to feel the coldness, the magic left in them. He also talks about another creature, light singers, which look incredibly lovely until they lure you close enough and then they drown you for fun. The Kelpies at least eat you. He's like, these guys just do it as a hobby. Light singer sounds strangely suspicious to shadow singer, which is what Azrael is. And it does make me go, I feel like we might want to hold this in our brain for Elaine's book. Cassian explains that these creatures are sent to the middle because they aren't doing crimes. This is just their nature of what they are as creatures. Okay. Nesta says Cassian, and Cassian says, you sent something? And Nesta says, I don't know what I sensed, but something is here. Cassian turns around to signal Azrael, but Azrael is gone. Cassian starts shouting for his bestie bro, and he sees Azrael's blue siphon flaring in the distance. They drop through the mist, and Nesta sees Azrael surrounded by 24 of Autumn Court soldiers, and one of them has shot an ash arrow through Az's wing. Cassian starts flying the other direction, and Nesta's like, what are you doing? Cassian says, I'm not landing with you in the middle of that. And Nesta says, put me down wherever and go back to him, Cassian. Cassian says, I know what every second cost me, Nesta. I am literally obsessed with the fact that he is choosing Nesta's safety over Azrael's right now. I think it's really sweet. I think it is really sweet. And Nesta says, put me down in that effing tree then. Leave, stop. You're wasting your time. Cassian finds a little patch of land in a tree and places her atop the tree and tells her to stay put no matter what she hears or sees. And Nesta is like, go, go, go. Cassian heads to Az and hopes he's okay, and he's been able to hold back the Autumn Court soldiers. The ash arrow in his wing would have dampened his power, which is why the soldiers aren't all just dead. Azrael should, with his magic, be able to just kill them all, but his magic is dimmed because of the ash arrow. Cassian can see the blue light as he slips silently through the mist. Az is fighting with 6 of the soldiers at once, and his powers seem like they're not working pretty much at all, except to continue to send up that blue light as a flare to bring Cassian to him. And then Cassian starts to kill him. Nesta's up in the tree, clinging to it, and she starts to get worried because Cassian's been gone for a long time. She's not going to be able to hold on much longer, and she can't see anything or hear anything. It's completely silent where she is. The boys should be able to take on those Autumn Court soldiers, but she's worried. She starts to think about all the time she's seen Cassian really badly injured. After so many brushes with death, it was only a matter of time before it stuck. Nesta can't endure just sitting in a tree, and she's like, maybe they could use my magic to help. Maybe I could help them. And so she starts to climb down the tree, and she gets to the ground, and she realizes she's going to need to wade through the bog to get to Cassian. But then she thinks about the fact that he might be hurt or dying, and she needs to get to him. The water is so dark it's impossible to tell if it's really deep or shallow, but Nesta can swim. She's like, either way I should be good. A voice inside her tells her to start running, but Nesta can't run. If she were to run, it would be towards him, not away. She's looking into the water when a face starts peering back. A spooky looking man with Sarah J. Maas's favorite description, sensuous lips. Yeah, that's right. This man has sensuous lips. Crawls out of the water. Nesta's crawling backwards to get away from him as he opens his mouth to reveal rows of sharp white teeth. Nesta does pee her pants in this moment as the creature crawls towards her, and it starts talking in a language that she doesn't understand. And that same gentle female voice in her head says, run, run, run. Who is this? I am curious. I'm a little perplexed by this gentle female voice in her head. Is it supposed to be the mask? Option 1. Is it Elaine? Option 2. That only I thought of right now. That's my new hypothesis. Anyway, she's so scared that she can't get to her feet. And then the creature is crawling towards her. It grabs her, its claws ripping into her skin. He's pulling her towards the water. Nesta's trying to stop herself. She's reaching behind her, clutching at little clumps of grass as he pulls her. And then he pulls her under the water. Cassian and Az have killed all but 2 of the Autumn Court soldiers. They have them tied up, and the eyes of these guys just look totally vacant, they are not present. And Az is something is wrong with them. Cassian notes that it seems like they haven't bathed in weeks, something seems very off. And Az says, do you think these are Eris's missing soldiers? He said they'd been acting strangely before they'd vanished. I'd certainly consider this strange behavior. And Cassian says, we'll find out soon enough. And Az is okay, but they need to get out of there because Cassian needs to get back to Nesta. Cassian doesn't wait for Az before taking off and heading back to the tree where he left Nesta. He gets there and she's not in the tree. He lands and he can smell her kind of crawling down the tree and then all the way to the water's edge, and then she disappears. Az lands next to him and he's like, I don't see her. Yeah, obviously Azrael. And Cassian's freaking out as he shouts Nesta's name into the bog. Nesta's under the black water, and it reminds her of being back in the cauldron. Nesta is sure she's going to die, but then she remembers she has weapons. She had fought back against the cauldron, and she is going to fight back now as well. She's able to strike the Kelpie, but he still pins her to the bottom of the bog, and then the Kelpie kisses her, and Nesta is taken back to that time with Tomas in the human lands. The Kelpie is like breathing into her mouth as he like rips away all of her weapons from her. He breathes into her mouth again, and he starts to like grope her, like he's got a tongue in her mouth and he is like grabbing her boobs, and he's laughing at her. She had escaped the monsters of the human realm only to find the same ones above the wall, had escaped from Tomas only to wind up here. The Kelpie continues to swim, dragging Nesta with it. She's like hitting bones that are buried at the bottom of this bog, and Nesta is searching for her power. She like starts begging for her power to come to the surface. She like is trying to save herself. She feels drawn to this like gold circle up ahead, and she's like being dragged to it, and the gold circle seems to like almost like move towards her as she's being dragged away, and it seems like the Kelpie can't see it, and she thinks like calls to like, and she grabs it as he continues to drag her. Power laid in her hands. Death gripped her by the other. She knew what she had to do with the sort of clarity only pure desperation and terror could bring. Knew what she had to risk. Her fingers tightened on the thing in her hand. Nesta slams the mask onto her face, and Nesta's immediately not in pain anymore. She doesn't need air. The Kelpie drops her as soon as he sees what she's wearing. She can feel the dead all around her. Thousands of bodies, but she doesn't need to call all of them. Not yet. The mask whispers, "Home, home," and she embraces its magic, just as old as hers. A skeleton comes up and grabs the Kelpie by the ankle. Drifting in the water, the power of the mask, an icy song through her, Nesta summoned the dead to do what her own body could not. Though she had fought back against Tomas, against the cauldron, against the king of Hybern, they had all happened to her. She had survived, but she had been helpless and afraid. Not today. Today, she would happen to him. The skeletons are cutting up the Kelpie, and Nesta just smiles as she watches it. Cassian's above the surface of the water, shouting for Nesta. He can smell her at the water's edge. He knows she peed her pants. Embarrassing. And he's wading into the water, and Azrael is like, "I don't see anything, we need Rhys." And Cassian's like, "He's not answering. He's on the mental telly and he's not answering the phone." Cass is freaking out, and then Azrael says, "Look." A bunch of skeletons with helmets and spears kind of emerge from the water. Cassian's moving towards them, but Azrael holds him back. And Azrael says, "Mother, save us." Just like in complete terror. Like Azrael is freaked. And then Nesta too emerges from the water, a mask on her face and a Kelpie's head in her hand, just like she had held the King of Hybern's head. Nesta-Rue is in the wrong book. Nesta-Rue needs to be in the book with a girlie who loves to bring a head to a party. Anyway, the dead clearly work for her, and Cassian just goes, "Nesta." Nesta drops the head back into the water, and her magic heads towards Cassian. Cold power rippled towards them, and as it hit, Cassian let it surge past him, around him, yield himself to it, because to stand against it would be to provoke the mask's wrath. To stand against it would be to stand against death itself. Death herself. Azrael shook, weathering that primal power, but they were both Illyrian, whether Az liked it or not, and so they did what their people had always done before death's beautiful face. They bowed. Chest deep in the water, they couldn't bow far, but they lowered their heads until their faces nearly touched the surface. I do love this part. I love it. This is actually like really important to me when Azrael and Cassian bow to Death herself. Lady Death? This is important to me, personally. Nesta then takes the mask off. The dead immediately like drop back into the water, and then Nesta begins to sink too. And Cassian grabs her as she goes back under, and Nesta goes like limp as Cassian hauls her ashore. She's shaking, clutching the mask to her chest, and Cassian just like holds her until she passes out. Next thing we know, they are back in Night Court. They are in the Court of Nightmares in the like torture chambers, and they have brought the two Autumn Court soldiers here. Nesta's asleep upstairs in Rhys's palace. She hadn't awoken since she collapsed in the bog, and the mask is warded in a separate room away from her. Rhys says, "Are you feeling more inclined to explain yourselves to the Autumn Court soldiers?" And Amren says, "They must be under some sort of enchantment. Their only drive seems to be to harm without context. Without reason." And Rhys says, "Why did you attack the members of my court in the Bog of Oorid?" And they just stare at the wall. And Feyre says, "It's as if they're under a spell from Brylin or Koschei. Then is it right to harm them like this?" And Rhys is like, "No, it isn't." And they decide they need to get Helion to see if he can break the enchantments over them. And then they decide, once they've kind of figured out what's going on, that they're going to talk to Eris about it. But they don't want to risk him they don't want to risk the fact that like maybe Eris is like behind this whole thing. So they kind of want to figure out what's going on before they involve him. And Feyre's like, "We need to be quick. These guys probably have families who are worried about them. Like, She's trying to be like the voice of reason here. They go upstairs. They find Nesta sitting in the room with the mask. And Rhys is like, how did you get in here? You were locked in one room and this was locked in another. And Nesta says the door was open. She immediately searches like the group for Cassian, who smiles at her as she like checks him over for injury. And Amren says, the mask opened the door for you. And Nesta says, I found myself beckoned here. Nesta looks terrible. Her mouth is all ripped up. The Kelpie had like bit her face essentially like a bunch of times as he was like kissing her and like breathing into her mouth. And she is just like bruised everywhere and like looks horrific. And Feyre says, does it speak to you? And Amren says, you are so lucky that you were able to take that mask off. Most of those who wore it had to be beheaded to remove the mask. And Nesta says, I wished it to let go. So it did. And Rhys says, like calls to like. Others could not free themselves because the mask did not recognize their power. And Az says, so Queen Brylan could use it. The Autumn Court soldiers who were guarding it until she could get there. Nesta says it should be destroyed. And Amren says that's not possible. It can only be dealt with, not eliminated. And Nesta says, then we should throw it into the sea. They can't do that, though, because they can't risk someone else finding it and using it. It is better to be locked away with them. But they'll need to figure out a way to keep it locked away. Feyre thinks Nesta might be the one to ward things or need to be the one to ward things because that they share this like common power from the cauldron. And Nesta says, I don't know how to do warding spells. I failed at the most basic of them while training with Amren, remember? And Feyre says, is that what you think, Nesta? That you failed? Nesta straightened and Cassian's chest tightened at the wall that rose up in her eyes, brick by brick, at the truth Nesta had let slip with that one word. Nesta says, it doesn't matter. Tell me how to do the spells and I'll try. Rhys lets her know that Helion will need to be the one to teach her. And then Feyre's like, we should get Magda to tend to your wounds. Like, you don't look great. Nesta says, don't worry, they're already healing. And Amren says, you look like a cat tried to eat your face off, and you smell like a swamp. And Cassian turns to Amren and says, being dragged through a bog will do that to you. Then he turns back to Nesta, and he goes, how did the Kelpie snare you? And Nesta says, I grew nervous when both of you didn't come back. I went to find you. Cassian says, we wouldn't have left you. Nesta says, I wasn't afraid of being left. I was afraid that you were both dead. Nesta recounts what happened to her, and she mentions that the Kelpie spoke, but not in a language that she understood, and Rhys asks to see her memory. He goes into her memory and then shows it to Amren. He was speaking the language of the ancient Fae, and he had said to her, are you my sacrifice, sweet flesh? How pale and how young you are. Tell me, are they resuming the sacrifices to the water once more? And when she hadn't responded, the Kelpie had said, no gods can save you. I shall take you, little beauty, and you shall be my bride before you are my supper. Cassian is like horrified at that, kind of realizing what the Kelpie had intended for Nesta, and kind of like putting in a new perspective, maybe like why her mouth is covered with bites. And they talk about how the mask had flown to her because, again, like calls to like. And Amren says, so you admit that your powers remain then? And Nesta says, you literally already knew that. Cassian says, all right, let Lady Death get some rest. And Nesta says, that's not funny. Cassian says, I think it's kind of catchy. Feyre suggests Nesta stay up in the Moonstone Palace for the night because the House of Wind is so like dark and cold. Nesta is like too tired to argue that the House of Wind was like her buddy and would like take care of her. But she winds up staying at the house. She takes a bath, scrubbing everything twice, and watches like the sun set out these like huge windows that are up in the Moonstone Palace. She recalled how the mask had gotten rid of her human feelings. Something that did not understand hate or love or grief or fear. That scared her more than anything else. That utter lack of feeling. How good it had felt to be so removed. She's scared of wanting that. How tempting it was to like put it back on. To like to completely eliminate all the like emotional pain that she's enduring. She like wants to destroy it to like save herself from that temptation. Cassian comes in and he's brought her some dinner because he wasn't sure if she'd be up to having to like eat dinner with everyone in the dining room. Nesta is like covered in bubbles in her hair, but obviously she's like naked. She's in the bathtub, and Cassian is like a little flustered to see her. And he like leaves the tray on the edge of the bath and he like makes to leave. And Nesta's like, do you want to get in? Cassian's like, you are hurt. And Nesta says, it looks worse than it feels by now. And she like wants to feel his warmth to drive away kind of that like the horrors of Oorid. She like wants that the comfort of having him close. And Cassian says, I thought you were dead today. And Nesta says, so did I. I thought you were dead too. Cassian says, you must have been happy. And Nesta says, it did not make me happy. Then they negotiate, and Nesta asks for things to stay purely physical between the two of them. And Cassian says, I will take whatever you offer me. And they do end up hooking up. And then afterwards, he leaves pretty quickly. He finishes, puts his pants on, and he pieces out. And Nesta is like a little confused because his exit was so abrupt. And they had kind of this like slightly more emotional, I mean, not super emotional, but like slightly more emotional day. And so she was like, I thought I could at least get like a little cuddle afterwards, but he like pieced out. real quickly. At training the next day, Emerie asks if Nesta and Cassian have slept together because they've been exchanging some heated looks. Cassian is working with a new pair of priestesses, so now we have like a bunch of priestesses coming. Gwyn confirms that she's getting the same vibes. And Emerie is like, well, if you won't talk about that, then at least tell us what happened yesterday, why there was no lesson, and where you were in the afternoon. And Gwen's like, I think it had something to do with the Trove. And they continue to discuss whether Nesta and Cassian hooked up and if it was good. It's like a very giggly girl time conversation. And Cassian yells at him, tells him to get back to work. And Gwyn brings up the practice of training of the mind that Valkyrie used to do that she's learned about in her research. They used it to keep calm in the middle of a battle, and she like suggests the girlies might try it. And then Nesta is like, yeah, let's do it, but don't tell Cassian about it. Cassian comes over and the girlies keep chatting instead of training, and Cassian's like, is there something more interesting today than your training? He's grinning because he knows that they're talking about him. And Emerie says, not at all. And Nesta says, when do we get to do something of use? When do we get to start on archery or swords? And Cassian says, you think you're ready to handle a sword? And from there, double meaning and bantering continues. You know, we've got some innuendo going on. Nesta says, only you can tell me that. Cassian had thought that hooking up with Nesta had been a mistake, but now he can't remember why. He's like, actually, that was really fun. Cassian says, you heard me. You think you're ready to handle a sword? Then prove it. He gets them practice swords to start with and then gives them a little lecture about how these are like weapons of death and they need to treat them with respect. And Nesta is kind of surprised by the weight of the sword, and Cassian lets her know that the real one will weigh even more. The girlies continue to giggle about the innuendo involved in learning how to handle a sword, but Nesta knows that it's like really important that the priestesses see her kind of like handle this moment with like seriousness, and so she like locks it down. Cassian's walking Nesta through a bunch of different like cuts and blocks with the sword, and everyone stops what they're doing to watch. She's still moving like really slowly and hesitating, but she's already learning, getting better even within this like one session. And Nesta's really enjoying it because it makes her feel powerful. It makes her feel like she's never going to be in a situation in which she's like completely powerless ever again. Never again. Never again would she be weak. Never again would she be at someone's mercy. Never again would she fail. Never again, never again, never again. And Cassian seems to understand what this means to her as he watches her with this like big smile. And then Cassian brings Emerie and Gwyn practice swords too. No fear shone in their eyes, as if they too saw what Cassian did, as if they too heard those words within Nesta's head. Never again. That fire stays within her all day, and immediately after her time in the library, she heads for the stairs. Every single step down, she says this to herself, never again. She had escaped the Kelpie by pure luck, but she had been terrified as she had been when she had been hauled into the depths of the cauldron. As terrified as she had been with Tomas, at least with Tomas, she had fought. With the Kelpie, she had barely done anything until the mask had spared her. She had become so afraid, so meek and trembling, it was unacceptable. Unacceptable that she had let herself balk and cower and curl inward. Never again, never again, never again. She makes it to the 6,000th step this time. Hi, I'm back. I'm in the same sweater because I'm trying to trick you, but unfortunately my hair would not look like it did yesterday. I haven't washed it since yesterday, and so today it's dirty, and so it's in a slick back instead of down. Couldn't fool you entirely. Anyway, we're back. It's the next day for them as well. And unfortunately for them, it's raining. It's gorgy here. Except it's supposed to be super high winds today. And Cassian kind of expects that like the priestesses aren't going to show up because the weather is so terrible. But they're out there when he arrives, and they're not even using magic to keep themselves dry. And now there are 3 new women. So I think we're up to like 8 priestesses. Plus Gwyn. Cassian had slept in the river house the night before because he did not want to be tempted to slip into Nesta's room after what had conspired. He looks over at his 3 girlies, like the main girlies, and he notices that Gwyn is not in her priestess robes anymore. She's wearing Nesta's old fighting leathers. And the crowd is like so big now. There's like a dozen of them approximately, and he's like, I need backup. And so the next day Az does come to assist. The women are initially hesitant around a new guy, but Az is just like so quiet and chill, and like Az, I imagine, has truly the best vibes. I feel like Az gives off trustworthy vibes. And so the women quickly relax around him. Cassian's working with Gwyn, Nesta, and Emerie because they're like much more advanced than the other priestesses. And they're taking a break with swords for like a minute just to like give their arms some rest. And Cassian is using the time to teach them ways to incapacitate a male if they're like in a hand-to-hand sort of situation. More of a self-defense move. Gwyn has spent the day kind of like giving side glances to Azriel, and Cassian realizes his mistake. He realizes he should have warned Gwyn and like talked talk to her a little bit about bringing Cassian in before he actually brought Cassian in, because Az was the one who rescued her from Sangrava. And so she might have some like emotions coming up around seeing him. And honestly, he is like, I really should have like cleared it with her, made sure she was comfortable with this. And he kind of feels a little bad for not doing that. He's demonstrating the hand-to-hand combat moves with Nesta. There's this like particular spot on a guy's neck that if it's pressed will knock them unconscious. And so he's holding Nesta's hand up to that spot on his neck. And he thinks her fingers are so small against his, freezing cold. He might have run his thumb over the back of her hand before he positioned her fingers. And Nesta squeezes his hand back as if she's caught him. Oh my gosh, the hand stuff. That afternoon, Nesta and Gwyn are like hiding in the library post training. They're like both freezing cold, trying to warm up. Nesta's sipping on some mint tea and reading Gwen's chapter on the Valkyries mindfulness practice. And Nesta says, so it's really that easy. You just sit somewhere comfortable and quiet and close your eyes and breathe a whole lot and let your mind go. Gwyn says it seems easy, but it isn't according to our research. It took Valkyrie months and multiple times a day of practice to even master the basics. Then Gwyn decides to lead them through like a simple practice since she's already memorized the steps through her like research and writing process. She tells Nesta to find a comfortable seated position. Nesta just copies the way Gwyn is sitting, and then Gwyn leads her through a series of breathing exercises. Nesta actually finds it like quite difficult to focus on her breaths rather than like her racing thoughts. But Gwyn like shushes her every time Nesta starts talking and tells her to focus on the sounds around them and then let them fade away, do the same thing with her body and then her emotions, kind of like walking her through the steps of like a very typical mindfulness practice. And as Nesta's trying to focus, she realizes that Gwyn is her friend. She's like, I think Gwyn's my friend. And it's very cute. And then Gwyn's like, okay, now we're going to focus on our breathing. And she like provides this like mantra that seems to be like one of the Valkyries like central things that they will remind themselves. And it is, tell yourself, I am the rock against which the surf crashes. Your thoughts are the surf, let them crash over you. Like this idea of like being like strong and still in the face of all of this like churning motion of the ocean. Nesta immediately starts to think about what Elaine would think about with seeing her with her friend Gwyn, and she thinks to herself, would Elaine be pleased or would she feel the need to warn Gwyn about Nesta's true self? Gwyn reminds her to acknowledge her thoughts and then let them go, and she makes it 7 breaths before she starts thinking about Elaine again. And then she like works hard to let those thoughts go. And then Gwyn wraps them up, telling Nesta to let her mind drift. And Nesta thinks, do as you want, mind. Go drift to those dark, horrible places. It didn't, though. Her mind lingered, didn't wander. It just sat there, contented, resting, like a cat curled up at her feet. Gwyn guides Nesta back into her body, and for the first time in Nesta's life, she feels like utterly settled in her own skin. And I love this because I think Nesta has like talked about the fact that like really she like didn't love being like turned into a fae, like that wasn't her choice, but she has felt more like at home in the fae world than she ever did in the human world. But I don't think she ever felt like fully comfortable in her body because of like the weird power situation. And I love that she is feeling at home now. The rain continues to fall for the next 2 days as it gets colder in Valaris, but the women just like continue to show up every day for training without fail. But today, Nesta and Cassian are on a little field trip. They are headed to the blacksmiths on the outskirts of Valaris. He had invited all of them to go, but Emerie had to go back to work for the afternoon, and the priestesses didn't want to leave the mountain because they're not supposed to. Cassian explains that to the blacksmith that he'd love to have like a demonstration of like the blade working for Nesta so she can see how a blade works and how it's made before she wields one, to show her that a blade is not merely a tool for killing but a piece of art as well. The man like waves them in. He's like very friendly, and he proceeds to explain the process to Nesta. Nesta barely speaks at all except to ask to leave the room with all of the fires and move to like the quieter part of the workshop. At one point, as the blacksmith is displaying the design process, Nesta asks if she can hammer out one of the blades. And he seems like quite reluctant, the blacksmith does, but Cassian says if any of the blades are damaged, we will buy them, we'll pay for them. And the blacksmith does give Nesta a blade, and they go back into the fire room, and he gives her a little demo on how to like stand and how to work the blade before she tries. And he brings out a few different weapons. Nesta struggles initially, but by the time he brings out the third sword, which is this big great sword, Nesta's totally got the hang of it. Cassian thinks as he watches her. It was a dance, each of her movements timed to the ringing echo of the hammer of the blade. She pounded the sword to a music no one could hear but her. The next day, sword day, the girlies are still learning swords. They're working hard. Cassian really hasn't, spoken to Nesta much since they returned from the blacksmith yesterday. He is, obsessed with her. He can't, stop thinking about her. He wants to sleep with her again, but he, wants to give her the space to initiate. He doesn't want to put her in a situation where she feels, at all pressured. Nesta, meanwhile, is working on, punching. They have, a padded tree trunk, which I think is supposed to serve as, their punching bag, and she's, hitting that at the end of training, and she's, thinking about how it feels really good to channel her energy in this way, to have this focused place to let go of all of this energy inside of her. She's been exhausted over the last few days as they've kind of moved into these more difficult pieces of sword work and things, and at the end of the day has fallen asleep almost as soon as she has crawled into bed. She continues working on her punching series as Lucien arrives on the roof. He's surprised to find Nesta punching the tree, and she's so focused that she doesn't even notice Lucien's arrival. Lucien says, Feyre said she was training, but I didn't think she meant training. And Cassian was did you think she was just up here filing her nails? And Lucien says, I wonder if there's some things that should not be awoken, commenting on Nesta, and maybe we shouldn't give her tools to deal with her rage. She's kind of already scary. Cassian says, mind your own business, Fireling. Apparently, Lucien needed to kill a couple hours, and Feyre suggested he go see Nesta, essentially, probably to check on her. She wanted an update from an unbiased third party, because Cassian is obviously Team Nesta, and Rhys is obviously Team anyone but Nesta, and so Lucien is a little more neutral. Lucien and Cassian have very hostile vibes, mostly Cassian. To be honest, he's still pissed about the way Lucien treated Feyre when she was in Spring Court, and he does not like he does not like this redheaded man. And Nesta looks over and sees Lucien, and there's that flash of that silver fire in her eyes, and Lucien gets a little freaked out by it. He's startled. Nesta has no interest in talking to Lucien, and is kind of, as soon as she sees he's out there, she heads inside by herself. And then Cassian and Lucien see the tree that she was punching, and she has punched a hole clean through the padding, and the tree is smoldering, and Cassian touches the spot where it is still smoldering, and it's not hot, it's ice cold. Lucien sees the same thing. He comes up behind Cassian and notices what he's looking at, and he says, Mother spare you all. Helion arrives to the Hewn City the next day on a Pegasus, so he's dealing with the mask situation. He wanted to arrive in a golden chariot pulled by 4 flying horses, but Rhys had told him just to winnow in, so this was the compromise. The winged horses are really rare. Helion only has 7 breeding pairs left, and those might be the only ones left in all of the world. There had been more, but a bunch of them had been vanished, and Amarantha had also killed most of the ones that had been left when she was ruling. The flying horse is pretty spectacular, and everyone is in awe. Helion offers to let Feyre take a ride, but Feyre's usually I take you up on it, but I'm with child. She immediately tells Helion she is pregnant. Cassian's surprised that they're telling Helion, but Rhys mentally tells him that they want access to Helion's library for the research to see if they have anything that might let them know if there's any chance of saving Feyre's life when it comes to her giving birth. And so they'll have to tell him anyway soon, so might as well tell him now. Helion congratulates them, and then asks after Mor, who's still in Valhalla. And Helion says, well, you wanted me to do some digging into a spell, or was that an excuse to get me to your twisted pleasure palace under this mountain? Because they're at the Moonstone Palace in the Hewn City. And Rhys says, don't make me regret bringing you here, Helion. And Helion said, where would the fun be if I didn't? And Feyre says, I missed you, friend. And Helion says, I'll deny it to the grave if you tell anyone, but I missed you too, Cursebreaker. Helion's so much fun. He's a fun guy. They are in the noon. After they go to the Hewn City and visit the Autumn Court soldiers, they head upstairs to the Moonstone Palace above the Hewn City. And now that they're out of the Hewn City, they can discuss in more detail what they think is happening, but they didn't want to do so down below because you never know who's listening. Feyre says, are the soldiers enchanted? And Helion says, enchanted is not the right word. Their bodies and actions are indeed not their own, but there is no enchantment that lies upon them. I can feel spells like threads. One that is enchanted feels like bindings around an individual. I sensed none of that. It was more like a fog. There's nothing to break, but yet it was there. And Rhys is does it feel less like a spell and more like an influence? And Helion says, I can't explain it, but it's like this fog around their mind that sways them. And Feyre says, the crown. The Dread Trove, from the Dread Trove. And then they kind of explain the whole Dread Trove. I don't know why that phrasing is so difficult for me. And situation and Brylin. And they realize that if Brylin has the crown, and they have the mask, then only the harp is still left at large. And they need to find that quickly, probably. It's still unclear what Brylan's motivations would have been to attack them in Oorid with those Autumn Court soldiers. They suggest that maybe she wanted to make the Night Court, an enemy of the Autumn Court. Or maybe she scryed for the mask and found out that it was the Bog of Oorid, and until she could get there, because remember, she's on the continent, she sent the Autumn Court soldiers there to kind of like guard it or to intercept Nesta if she were to head to the bog. It's kind of unclear. But then they ask Helion about the mask and how best to ward it since it escaped last time. And Feyre says, can you show Nesta how to ward it herself? And Helion says, yeah, I should be able to. Let me see her. And so they go down to where Nesta's chilling. She's like in her room. Or in a room. I don't know where she is exactly. Feyre and Rhys are being like flirty vibes as they walk into the house and get Nesta, and it makes Cassian think about how he'd like really love to sleep with Nesta again. And this is something that comes up often for Cassian. Apparently he's thinking about it so much it makes him a little smelly. You know, Helion picks up on it and asks what Cassian is thinking about, and Cassian responds, your mother. We love a your mom joke. And Helion laughs. I always forget how much I liked you. Nesta is reading in I think she's in like the study of the Moonstone Palace, and quickly puts the book aside and everyone enters the room, and Cass assumes it's one of the romances the girlies are always passing around. Helion bows and says, Lady Nesta. Nesta goes, Lady. Feyre says, he's just being polite. Nesta looks to Cassian. Now I understand why you find the title grating. Nesta comments on the winged horses that arrived earlier and how like spectacular it was. And Helion obviously starts flirting because like kind of that's his default setting. But Nesta is like very polite with Helion, but she does not reciprocate the flirting. She keeps things very like civil and makes it clear that like not something she wants to pursue. Rhys redirects Helion's attention to the mask as Nesta uncovers it, and Helion says, you truly wore this and lived. Cover it again. I can't stand it. Feyre and Rhys comment on how it doesn't bother them really to be in the room with it, but for Helion it feels like cold claws like scratching against his senses. Then after it's covered again, Helion turns to Nesta and tells her he's ready to teach her some warding tricks. Helion creates the wards and essentially like keys them to Nesta's blood. And Cassian has a visceral reaction to the sight of Nesta's blood and the smell of her blood. And he has to like physically like restrain himself from like stepping in, even though he knows that like obviously she's totally fine. It's like a little pinprick. And Feyre like notices that Cassian's being weird and she's like, what is wrong with you? And Cassian says, nothing. Stop being such a busybody, curse breaker. And Feyre asks if he's jealous of Helion. Meanwhile, Helion is finishing up the wards and tells Nesta, once we leave this room, no one shall be able to enter it. Even you, if you do not unlock my wards, cannot enter. And Helion says, let me show you the unlocking spell. And Nesta says, no, I don't want to know it. And then she makes up this little bit of a lie. She says, if Brylan is hunting for the mask, if she apprehends me, I don't want to have any knowledge of how to free it. And Rhys instead learns how to unlock the wards instead. So if it comes down to it and they need to get to the mask, Rhys can teach Nesta how to do it. Azriel brings up that now that they're sure about the Autumn Court soldiers, they need to tell Eris about it, but they aren't going to mention the mask yet. They're going to keep that from him. Rhys tells Cassian to go talk to Eris tomorrow and to bring Nesta. And Nesta says, why? And Rhys says, because you savor playing the game. And Cassian says, sounds fine to me. And Az says, I will travel to the human lands tomorrow and confirm that Brylan has the crown. And then Rhys and Feyre say, no, you are not going to the human lands. They actually are like, no more trips to the human lands, as if Brylan has the crown, we can't risk you being like put under the influence of Brylan, because it would be like very subtle, and so it would be easy for you to be captured and then like turned against us. And Az is like, give me some credit, I can keep hidden. And Feyre's like, we like will not take the risk, and also like you need to pull all your spies from the human lands because we can't trust any of them now. Like, none of the information we get from them we'll be able to trust because they might be put under the influence of Brylan without our knowledge. And Azriel is like, are you serious? And he turns to Rhys and she says, and you agree with her? Whoa, Az, didn't love this. Do not go to mom, or don't go to dad because mom said no. And Rhys says a similar thing. She is your high lady. What she says is law. Helion breaks the tension, saying he'd like to hang out and chill with them for a little bit. Cassian stops Nesta on their way out and asks what she's been reading, and she's been reading A Brief History of the Great Sieges. And Cassian is impressed. And Nesta says, I realized after you left me the dance of the battle that there's a great deal left for me to learn. Last night I asked the house to give me something you might read. What's the point in learning fighting techniques if I don't know their true purpose and uses? You'd train me into a weapon, and I'd just be that, someone else's weapon. I want to know how to wield it. Myself, and others. Cass says, you plan on leading any armies, Ness? Nesta says, not an army, but perhaps a small unit of females. Cass says, the priestesses? Nesta says, I don't know if they join, but there are others out here. There are others out there, I'm sure, who might. I'm immortal now, or as close to it as possible. I have nothing but time to plan for the future. Cassian knocks on Nesta's door after dinner, and she's reading the romance again, and she tells him that war books are only for the daytime. Obviously, that's not a nighttime before bed book. He's brought her more war books that he thought she might like, and she turns to leave, and Nesta asks him, was it not good for you? And he goes, what? And Nesta says, was our hookup not good for you? And Cassian says, why would you ask that? Nesta says, you left so quickly and you didn't seek me out again. Cassian says, you've been busy with training. And Nesta's like, okay, all right, well, then good night. Cassian says, I didn't mean it like that. I didn't want to be selfish or demanding. I didn't want to be selfish and demand more of your time when you've been so invested in training. And Nesta says, it's not a demand if both sides want it. And I'm just worried that you didn't enjoy it as much as I did. And Cassian says, I enjoyed myself too much. I thought about it for days and days. And it moves into like spicy the flirting territory after that, which I cannot repeat. Then they hook up again. And this is the infamous put your hands on the headboard scene. If you know, you know. The next day, Cassian is summoned to the river house before dawn the next morning. So crack it on, he's at the river house. He hadn't spent the night in Nesta's room last night, don't be correse, but they had hung out for a few more minutes than the first time. He didn't immediately run off. He stinks like Nesta, and he knows the rest of them can smell it, and Amren gives him the side eye. Amren's like, all right, Rhys, tell me why I'm here before breakfast while Varian is still sleeping soundly in my bed. And Rhys says, we're here because before dawn I got a visit from a blacksmith out by the western edge of the city, the one that you and Nesta visited a few days ago. Rhys pulls the cloth away to reveal a stack of weapons. How dramatic. I love how he didn't have the weapons out. He had them with a grand reveal. He was like... Rhys is such a theater kid sometimes. Cassian says, why did he bring you these weapons? As a gift? And Azriel leans forward to touch them, and Rhys is like, I wouldn't do that. The blacksmith dumped him here in an absolute panic. He said the blades were cursed and that they are our problem now. Cassian explains that nothing weird happened in the shop and Nesta just hammered the blades, and so he's kind of confused. But Rhys explains that a long time ago, the Hi-Fi could imbue items with elemental magic, but no one has been able to do it for 10,000 years. The last one made was the great blade Gwydion vanished around the time the last of the Trove went missing. Gwydion belonged to the king of Prythian back when one king ruled over all the courts, until he had been betrayed by his own queen and his fiercest general and lost the sword to them, and the lands fell into darkness once more. One, I hate learning a sword's name. One thing I don't want to have to do is learn a sword's name. Ugh. But Gwydion, I do feel might be important. Two, I think we will go into a conversation about the king of Prythian and how Amren thinks Rhys should become the king of Prythian. I would hate nothing more than Rhys becoming the king of Prythian. I already think he's doing a bad job covering the Night Court. I don't think he should be in charge of everyone. But I would be obsessed with, would die for Nesta becoming the queen of Prythian. Nesta and Cassian, queen and king of Prythian, or queen and prince. Because I want Nesta to be the queen regent and Cassian to be the prince. You know how when Queen Elizabeth was the queen, her husband was Prince Philip? He wasn't the king. Because the king is always a ruler. So he's relegated to prince. That's what I would like for Cassian. None of this equality BS that Rhys and Feyre got going on. No. Nesta is better than him. And it would be silly for us to forget it. Anyway, Az goes on to say, so Nesta's created a new magic sword. And Amren says, only the great powers could do that. Gwydion was given its powers when the high priestess Oleana dropped it into the cauldron during its crafting. And Cassian says, one touch from Nesta's magic while the blade was still hot and the blade was infused with it. Nesta had no idea what she was doing. She was just letting off some steam. And Amren says, which might be worse. Who knows what emotion she poured into the blades with her power. It might have shaped them into instruments of such feelings, or it might have been the catalyst to release her power. There's no way of knowing what the blades are like. Amren wants them to treat this item essentially as a new dread trove, because it is so clearly quite powerful, and they don't really know what it could do. And Cassian's you can't be serious, don't be silly. And Amren says the dread trove was forged by the cauldron. Nesta possesses the cauldron's powers, so anything she crafts and imbues with her power becomes a new trove. At this point, I wouldn't so much as eat a piece of toast if she toasted it. Eat a piece of bread if she toasted it. Now, Az says, people will kill for this power. Either kill her to stop it, or kill us to capture her. Then you really need to keep this on the DL. And Amren is we can't tell Nesta. And Cassian goes, what do you mean? And Amren says, what if in one of her moods, Nesta creates what she pleases just to spite us? Nesta would create not a dread trove, but a trove of nightmares. Boo! Tomato, Amren. You guys were pals for a while. I don't know why you suddenly decided Nesta's evil. Nesta has always been mean, but she has never been evil. Amren really gets annoying in this chunk of the book. And I'm remember when you guys were friends literally a couple months ago? Don't be weird. Anyway, Cassian's like, she would never do that. And like, I can't lie to her. And Amren says, you don't need to lie. Just don't volunteer that information. And Rhys agrees with Amren. Obviously, he hates Nesta. And Amren says, I'd be careful when you're sleeping with her. Who knows what she might transform you into when her emotions are high. What a horrific thing to say about Nesta and Cassian. And she's supposed to be nice to these people. She gets in trouble for being mean to them. Sorry, this is what they're out here doing behind her back. She catches the vibe, and she knows the vibes are bad. Rhys will ask Feyre her vote when she gets back from the studio. It's because then Az goes, that's enough. I'm with Cassian on this one. It's not right. She keeps the knowledge from Nesta. So the Illyrian boys, Azriel and Cassian, vote to tell Nesta that she has these powers. And Rhys and Amren say no. And so Rhys says, okay, we're going to ask Feyre when she gets back. She'll be the deciding vote. Amren says that sword shall be known in history. It shall remains to be seen whether it shall be known for good or evil. Amren tells Rhys to hide the weapons and do not unsheath any of the blades. Then she leaves. Once Amren leaves, Rhys updates the boys on what he's learned about Feyre's pregnancy from Draken and Miriam. Essentially, the Draken and Miriam come from, like, are they called seraphim? I think they might be called something like that. But essentially their wings are like more like angel wings, and they're like quite soft and flexible. And so it's not really an issue when birth is happening. So talking with them was entirely unhelpful. The Dawn Court has like a similar sort of situation with their winged people, that they're like, the wings are soft. So similarly unhelpful. Rhys still hasn't told her. And Cassian asks, like, hey, Bessie, why aren't you telling her? And Rhys says, because I can't bring myself to give her that fear, to take away the one bit of joy in her eyes every time she puts a hand on her belly. It's eating me alive. This terror, I keep myself busy, but there is no one to bargain with for her life, no amount of wealth to buy it, nothing I can do to save her. And obviously this does make me cry. Obviously, when I was reading this, I was crying. This is the plot of Breaking Dawn. I talked about it. I think I talked about it in the first book, and I haven't talked about it really since. Although I think there are like multiple points that parallel, but like this book more than anything since the very beginning, this book is Twilight. This book is Twilight. I've said it once. I'll say it again. Tamlin is Jacob, and Rhysand is like such an Edward Cullen. And this is such a Breaking Dawn moment. What do you mean she's pregnant and the baby's gonna kill her because it's half the creature that her husband is? It's Breaking Dawn. Anyway, I like hate it. I hate it. I hated Breaking Dawn. And I do like really like viscerally have a strong like negative reaction to this whole like pregnancy situation, because it just seems like so easily avoidable. And I just like, I like hate what it's done to Feyre as a character in this book. Like, I know she's not a main character, and like that's fine. I love Nesta. I'm glad she's at the center of this book. But like Feyre is just like wandering around like painting and like almost dying. Is just like the most passive girly in all the land. Is just like been stripped of all power and agency. Like, she was the most powerful girl ever, and now she's like reduced to just being like this girl who's gonna die because her baby's gonna kill her. It's just like, ugh. Let women have power and keep it. Rhys explains that he told Helion while he was here yesterday and begged him on his knees to look into his, which I like feel like wasn't necessary. That's crazy. He was like, I dropped to my knees and begged him. And Helion's like, you could have just asked like a normal person. Don't be a weirdo, Rhys. To look into his libraries to see if there's anything that Helion could find to save her. And Helion has put every librarian and researcher on it. So now, not only does like everyone in their court know that Feyre is dying, Helion knows, and all of his librarians and researchers know. Because, like, the thing is, because this situation is, like, so specific to Feyre as, like, the shapeshifter who is married to a half Illyrian man, everyone's gonna know it's her. Like, it's not like they can be like, there's just, like, hypothetically some girl we found who was a shapeshifter who was human but then turned fae, and, like, it's gotta be her. It's gotta be her. Anyway, Cassian says, we'll hold out hope then. And Cassian then turns his attention to the swords and asks Rhys to use his magic to unsheath them so they don't have to touch them. He just wants to see them. And Rhys says, Amren said not to unsheath them. This is a bad idea. And Cassian says, that should be what's written on the Night Court crest. Rhys comments on how so heavy the sword is against his magic. Like, it weighs more magically than it should. The steel is literally glowing like moonlight as it leaves the scabbard. Rhys also unsheaths the dagger in the other sword. The dagger radiates cold. The second sword is hot and angry, and then like the main sword just like radiates power. Amren laughs from the doorway. I knew you idiots wouldn't be able to resist. The boys are completely in awe. They've never seen anything like it. And Amren mentions that there had been another magic sword that Amarantha had destroyed called Narbin. And that sword was even older than Gwendian, and it seemed like she tossed it into the sea. which, like, doesn't really make sense. They, like, talk about it. They're like, yeah, Amren didn't always make sense, but, like, she probably was mad or something. Whatever. And Amren says, with these 3 blades, you can make yourself High King, Rhys. And Rhys says, I do not wish to be High King. I only wish to be here with my mate and my people. And Amren pushes back. All 7 kingdoms united under one ruler would give them a better chance in the coming war. And Rhys says, we would have to fight an eternal war first. I would be branded a traitor by my friends and in other courts. I'd be forced to make them kneel. And Azrael's like, honestly, some of the other High Lords might be into it. Like, honestly, most of them. It seems like Baron would be the only one who would have, like, a really big problem with it. And Rhys asks Amren, why do you want me to turn conqueror? And Amren says, why do you shy away from the power that is your birthright? And Rhys says, I did nothing to earn that power. I was born with it. It is a tool to defend my people, not to attack others. Cass and Azrael even seem to agree that, like, strategically it does make sense that it would be easier to fight wars if everyone was united under Rhys as the king. It would may allow them to deal with external threats more efficiently. But Rhys continues to protest. He is not interested in this. Then explain to me, after thousands of years, objects that once crowned and aided the old Fae have returned. The last time a High King ruled Prythian, it was with a magic sword in his hand. Look at that great sword before you, Rhys, and tell me that it is not a sign from the cauldron itself. The cauldron's power flows through Nesta and could use her as a puppet without her knowledge. It wanted those weapons made, and thus they were made. It wanted Rhys to have them, and thus the blacksmith brought them to you, Rhys, not to Nesta. And do not forget that Nesta herself, and Elaine, with whatever powers she has, is here. Feyre is here. All 3 sisters, blessed by fate and gifted with powers to match your own. Feyre alone doubles your strength. Nesta makes you unstoppable, especially if she were to march into battle wearing the mask. No enemy could stand against her. She'd slay Baron's soldiers and then raise them from the dead and turn them on him. Rhys leveled a cool stare at Amren. I will not entertain this ridiculous notion for another moment. Very well, Rhys. Amren also turned from the desk, and the blades, Rhys's magic, now sheathed and set upon the surface. But know that the cauldron's benevolence will be extended to you only for so long before it is offered to another. I do not know why Amren is obsessed with this idea, but, like, Amren is obsessed with this idea of, like, Rhys turning, like, High King. And I just, like, I'm really not that into it. I, like, think that would be annoying. I already find Rhys, like, a little annoying when he is, like, the boss of everyone in the room. And so, like, I don't think we need to put him in front of, like, more people. But again, I would be totally on board if Nesta became High Queen. And maybe the blacksmith only bought the swords here because who wants to climb up to the House of Wind? He doesn't have wings. I don't think. Maybe he does. Next time we see Nesta and Cassian, they are headed to the spring court. They're dropped off there by Rhys for their meeting with Eris. Cassian is already itchy when he arrives, and Nesta is very empathetic to the situation. She says when she was a human girly, she would get really itchy during the springtime as well. She would have to take, like, multiple baths per day to get all the pollen off her skin. So they're a match made in heaven. These besties will not be vacationing in the spring court. And she's looking around at all the beautiful flowers and things and thinking about how much Elaine would love this place. I have heard some theories on the internet that maybe Elaine's going to end up with Tamlin, because she might love the spring court so much. And you know what? As someone who doesn't like her current options, I like this one better than the other 2. Wild but true. They arrive and Eris is late and Nesta says, do you think he's coming? And Cassian says he's likely sipping some tea, enjoying the fact that we're here waiting for him. Well, he only knows I'm coming, but he'll enjoy the thought of making me wait. And Nesta goes, he's a bastard. And at that moment, Eris chooses to appear because I think he's probably just lurking, waiting for the, the prime moment to arrive. And he pops out from wherever he was sitting, hidden, and he says to Nesta, are you talking about me or the brute beside you? Obviously being like, bastard, do you mean Cassian? Which is rude. It's rude behavior. And then he says, hello, Nesta Archeron. I hear you have something to tell me regarding my soldiers, because they are here to talk to them about what happened to the Item Cover soldiers. And Cassian goes ahead and explains that most of his soldiers are dead. Only two have survived. Nesta is just watching Eris's face the whole time, kind of just, like, monitoring his, like, micro expressions, trying to, like, anticipate kind of how he's feeling and how they should respond to that. Eris says, who did this? And Cassian says, technically Azrael and I did. Your soldiers were enchanted by Queen Brylin and Koschei to be mindless killers. They attacked us and we had no choice but to kill them. And Eris says, yet two survived. How convenient. Cassian says we could only manage to contain 2 of them under Brylin's influence. They were practically rabid. And Eris says, let's not lie to ourselves. You only bothered to contain 2 by the time your brute bloodlust ebbed away. And Cassian says we did what we could. There were 24 of them. And Eris says there were more than that. You could have spared more than 2. But I don't know why I'd expect someone like you to have done any better. And And Cassian's like, do you want me to apologize to you? And Aerys says, did you even try to spare any others, or did you launch right into the massacre? And Nesta says, you know what? She's like done with this, with Aerys like berating Cassian and treating him like he's an animal that like had no choice but to kill all these men. Nesta says, your soldiers shot an ash arrow through one of Azriel's wings. Did Brylin arm the soldiers with those ash arrows, or did they come from your private armory? Cassian says, such weapons are banned, aren't they? And Nesta says, who are you storing those arrows for? Enemies abroad or an enemy at home? And Aerys says, I don't know what you're talking about. And Nesta says, wouldn't an ash arrow through the heart kill a high lord? And Aerys says, you're wasting my time. And Nesta says, and you're wasting ours. For all we know, you bespelled your soldiers to kill us, claimed your hounds found scents at the site of their disappearance that linked it to Brylin, and then lied about Baron's alliance. Perhaps you even got Morgan's father to delay his visit to Valaris as a piece in a grand scheme to gain our trust. All part of your game. If you want to play warmonger, go right ahead, Aerys. I like an interesting opponent. And Aerys says, whoa. I'm not your enemy. Cassian explains that, like, he, like, regrets that they couldn't save more, but, like, they did the best they could, given the circumstances, and they will send back the 2 they have that are still under the crown's thrall ASAP. Cassian offers, if the families of the soldiers need anything at all, I will gladly give them what I can to help them. And Aerys notes the fact that Cassian had a hand on Nesta's back as he's talking, and Aerys smirks. He's like, again, reading these clues that Cassian and Nesta have like something going on between them. And Aerys turns to Nesta and says, you are a pretty little treat. I'd be happy to play any manner of games with you, Nesta Archeron. Cassian kind of tenses at this, and Nesta is thinking about how he's letting himself be like too vulnerable, like he is too easy to read, he is too honest, and just even the way he carries himself. But there's part of her that really admires it too. Nesta works so hard to build up walls around any of her vulnerabilities that like much of her external presentation is like a lie that she's like crafted, and she admires Cassian's vulnerable honesty in the way he carries himself. Aerys says, when you get tired of the animal, come find me and I'll show you how a future High Lord plays. Just then, a creature arrives, and Nesta immediately remembers the beast from when he came to get Feyre, and Cassian tucks Nesta behind him. Nesta doesn't stay there for long, but we get to see Tam, and Cassian says, hey, Tam, I know we were here uninvited, but we have been using this as a conference room, but we'll get out. We didn't realize we didn't know you were here and you were going to need this space, so we'll get going. Tamlin starts staring at Nesta, and Nesta just thinks about how much she hates this man. This was the male the beast her sister had once loved, had given up everything, including her mortal life, to save, who had then taken her love and twisted it, nearly breaking Feyre in the process, until Cassian and the others had helped bring her back, helped her to learn how to love herself once more. Nesta didn't care if he'd come to help during the final battle with Hybern. Tamlin had hurt Feyre unforgivably. It had never concerned her before. Irked her, yes, but Nesta found her fingers curling, found her lips peeling back from her teeth as she snarled. Her youngest sister had been taken by this male because Nesta herself hadn't been able to face him. Tamlin had even looked at her and asked if she'd go in Feyre's place, and she had said no, because she was a hateful, horrible coward. She would not be a coward now. Oh, Tamlin better watch out. Nesta lets a little of her power out to flare, like, in her eyes. You know, she loves a little glowy eye moment. Just to, like, make sure Tamlin knows who he's talking to. And Tamlin's like, I have every right to kill trespassers on my land, still in beast form. And Nesta says, are these still your lands? Last I heard, you don't bother to rule them anymore. I suggest you keep your maw shut about this. And Tamlin says, you are exactly as nasty as your sister said you were. And Nesta says, I'd hate to disappoint. Nesta's staring that man down, silver flames at her fingertips. I went into the cauldron because of you. Elaine went into the cauldron because of you. I don't care how much you try to apologize or to atone for it or claim you didn't know the King of Hybern would do such a thing, or that you begged him not to do it. You colluded with him because you thought Feyre was your property. And Nesta points at Tamlin, and the ground underneath them shakes. And Tamlin says, put that finger down, you witch. And Nesta says, I'm glad you remember what happened to the last person I pointed at. We'll be going now. And she walks into Cassian's arms. Aerys winnows away and Cassian takes off. But before he does, Nesta turns to Tamlin and says, tell anyone you saw us, High Lord, and I'll rip your head from your body. She's my queen. I love her so much. The next time we see Nesta, it is late that night. She's in the library. She's just staring down to the like black heart at the center of the library. Cassian had immediately dropped her off at the House of Wind and then flown to the River House, and he hadn't returned. Nesta's hoping that maybe Rhys will do everyone a favor and just like turn Tamlin's mind to jelly. She's sick of that boy. She's alone in the library. And then the House of Wind sends her a glass of warm milk so she can go to sleep. The spring court had felt stagnant, hollow, empty despite its growing life. But this house was alive. It welcomed her, wanted her to grow and thrive. It was a place where she might rest or explore, where she could be whoever and whatever she wished. Was that what home was? She had never learned. But this place, yes, home might be a good name for it. Perhaps that was what Feyre had felt too when she'd left the spring court and come to these lands. Perhaps Feyre had fallen in love with this court as much as she had its ruler. Ugh, I love this so much. I love that Nesta receives so much softness from the House of Wind. I just when Nesta finds little glimmers of home in House of Wind or in Cassian, it just literally warms every corner of my heart. Cassian finds her in the library and he says, I thought I might find you here or on the stairs. Can't sleep? Nesta goes, I have been thinking about Tamlin. And Cassian says, you did well with him, and you did well against Eris too. I don't think I'll forget that anytime soon. And Nesta goes, he's a snake. And Cassian says, glad we agree on something. Nesta continues, I didn't appreciate him speaking to you like that. Cassian says, that's how a lot of people speak to me. And Nesta says, that doesn't make it right. She had spoken to him like that. She had said far worse things to Cassian than Eris had. I can't believe Feyre had ever loved Tamlin. And Cassian goes, Tamlin never deserved her. And Nesta goes, no, he didn't. After Cassian had found her in the library, he had taken her back to her room and he had seen the chapter from Gwyn on the Valkyrie, sitting in her room. And then they hooked up. But Cassian now knows. Remember, they were going to keep their Valkyrie work a secret? Secret source has been spoiled. Cassian does know about it. The next day, the girlies are complaining a bit about their sword work. And Cassian comes over and says, some Valkyrie unit you guys have. And Gwyn says, you told him? Both Cassian and Nesta are no. Cassian explains, you think I haven't noticed the breathing techniques that let you get that calm, steady look even when Az and I are pissing you off? I sure as hell didn't teach you that. I can still recognize mind stilling a mile off. And Gwen's you know the technique. And Cassian says, of course I do. I fought beside the Valkyries in the war. Gwen's so excited at the idea that Cassian may have known some of the Valkyries personally, and he explains he fought beside them in multiple battles. And he also explains that he was at the battle where most of them fought and died very bravely. And Nesta's why didn't you say anything about it when you were looking at those pages on my desk? And Cassian says, you didn't ask. How is she to know to ask, Cassian? And then Gwyn says, why don't we use the Valkyrie techniques if you admire them so much? And Cassian says, I don't know them. And they decide to start incorporating some of the Valkyrie techniques that Gwyn has been researching into their practice. Gwyn is going to pull some things for them to start doing kind of in addition to the Illyrian fighting and training methods. That evening, Cassian heads to the River House to learn what Feyre's vote is going to be about Nesta's weapons. But first he has to update Feyre on how Nesta's training is going. Feyre, obviously, because she's not a monster, voted to tell Nesta. And Cassian says, okay, let me take care of it. I will let her know when the time is right. Elaine is really interested in learning about the Valkyrie because they had never heard of them in the human lands at all. And so she's really interested in this group of women who fought. And Rhys says, some were as lovely as you, Elaine, from the outside. But once they set foot in the arena of battle, they became as bloodthirsty as Amren. And Amren says, I liked those females and never let a man boss them around. Cassian says Nesta would have fit in well with them, and Elaine says, I always thought she was born on the wrong side of the wall. She made ballrooms into battlefields and plotted like any general. And Feyre says Nesta is a wolf who has been locked in a cage her whole life. I know, Cassian said. She was a wolf who had never learned how to be a wolf thanks to that cage humans called propriety and society. And like any maltreated animal, she bit anyone who came near. Good thing he liked being bitten. Good thing he savored the bruises and scratches she left on his body every night. And Elaine says, you only think you know. You haven't seen her on the dance floor. That's when Nesta truly lets the wolf roam free. When there's music, she loves dancing and music. Not in the way I enjoy a waltz, but in the way that performers make an art of it. Nesta could bring an entire ballroom to a halt when she danced with someone. And then Elaine goes on to explain that the last ball that Nesta had attended before they had become poor, back when Nesta was 14, there had been an heiress who had really hated Elaine, had kind of bullied her to some respect. And Nesta saw how this heiress treated her sister, and she decided to take matters into her own hands. There was this duke at the ball that the heiress was like going after, and the duke was there to find a bride. And Nesta knew the heiress was interested because she had just like continued to brag about it. And so Nesta like spent a fortune on her outfit for the ball that night. She was dressed to the nines and a gorgeous gown and jewels and all of this. She immediately caught the duke's attention, and she lured him into asking her for a dance. The same waltz that the heiress had wanted for herself, had boasted would be all she needed to secure his marriage bid. Nesta took that dance from her, and then took the duke from her too. Nesta danced that night like she was one of you. The duke was vain, and Nesta played into that. The entire room came to a standstill. Their dancing was that good. She was that beautiful. And when it ended, I knew she was an artist then. The same way Feyre is, but what Feyre does with paint, that's what Nesta did with music and dance. Our mother saw it when we were children and honed it into a weapon. Also, Nesta might one day marry a prince. Cassian's tummy hurts at the thought that, like, Nesta probably wants a prince, and he's just, like, you know, like, he's a bastard boy, born, like, Illyrian. He's not even high fae, like, he is, and he's bastard born, and, like, who is he? But, like, just a boy. And he's like, Nesta probably wants someone with, like, status and power, and I, like, can't offer her that. He's like, Nesta probably wants a prince. Ugh. The Duke proposed the next morning after the ball, but Papa Archeron was like, she's 14, she's not going to be married, you freak. And, like, Nesta knew that. Nesta knew, like, her father would never allow her to get married at 14 because she's not a child bride. And so this had all been part of her scheme. But Elaine goes on to say, I think some part of Nesta believed she would indeed marry a prince one day. So the Duke went home with no bride, and that heiress, well, she was one of the people who delighted in our misfortunes. Nesta, like, never spoke of it afterwards, but, like, it is such a core memory for Elaine. Amren says, so your mother twisted Nesta's creative joys into a social climber's arsenal. And Feyre says, our mother was not what one would call a pleasant person. Nesta has made her own choices, but our mother laid the groundwork. And Elaine says, I'm very pleased to hear of this Valkyrie business. I'm happy that Nesta finds interest in something again and might channel all of that into it. That, Cassian knew, meant her rage, her fierce and unyielding loyalty to those she loved, her wolf's instincts and ability to kill. They moved on to far merrier subjects, but Cassian mulled over it throughout the evening. The fighting was only one part of it. The training would sustain her, funnel that rage, but there had to be more. There had to be joy. There had to be music. He's like, I need to get my girlie some tunes and some music. Back on the rooftop for training a few days later, the next day, who knows? And the girlies are starting to do some Valkyrie exercises and finding them exhausting. It sounds like a lot more like yoga Pilates style work, and they're using this like mantra that is like the Valkyrie mantra of I am the rock against which the surf crashes, and they are practicing these like mind stilling methods, which are meditations essentially. Azrael isn't there today, but he left the priestesses that he usually works with like a strict plan to work through. And Gwen is like, you should try it. I don't even think you could survive that, to Cassian. And Cassian says, thanks to the passages you sent me last night, I was here at dawn doing the exercises myself. I figured if I'm going to torture you three, I should at least be able to back it up. And then Cassian, they're like working and kind of like chatting, and Cassian asks the girls, like, what if you had a sword, what would you name it? And Gwen goes, Silver Majesty. And Emerie goes, Foe Slayer. And Nesta says, this is a weird question, why do you want to know this? And Cassian says, just humor me, Nesta. Come on, Ness. And Nesta says, Killer. I don't know why it's necessary to name a sword. A great point, Nesta. And then the girlies are like, wait, are you like getting Nesta a sword as a solstice present? Is that what you want to know? Like, why are you asking? Now the girlies are all like, wait a second, this is a weird question. And Nesta's like, clearly something's going on. And then Cassian's like, no, there's nothing going on. Get back to work. Cassian. Too transparent of a boy. Nesta's still thinking about the conversation 2 hours later as they finish up trading. She waits for Emerie and Gwen to leave, or to kind of like, they go get water. They're not like leaving totally, but like go off before she goes up to Cassian, and she says, why were you pestering me about naming a sword? Cassian says, I just want to know what you'd name one. And Nesta says, that's not an answer. Why do you want to know? Cassian explains that when she'd went to the blacksmith, she had imbued the swords that she had worked with cauldron's magic, and she essentially created a new dread trove and could probably create more items. Kind of explains kind of the whole situation to her. And Nesta says, I made 3 magic weapons. And Cassian says, we don't know what manner of weapon or what manner of magic they have yet, but like, yeah, they're definitely magical. And Nesta says, who is we? And Cassian says, Rhys and Feyre and the others. And Nesta says, all of you knew about this? For how long? Cassian realizes that he's messed up. He realizes that he's revealed a little bit too much, and he tries to kind of diffuse the situation, telling her that now, like, isn't the time to talk about it. And she was like, you were the one who brought this up during training. Like, why did you bring it up during training right now if this wasn't going to be a good time to talk about it? Cassian says, we argued about whether to tell you, but we took a vote on it and went in your favor because we trust you. I just hadn't gotten a chance to bring it up yet. And Nesta says, there was a possibility that you wouldn't even tell me. You all sat around and judged me, and then you voted. Something deep in Nesta's chest cracked to know that every horrible thing about her had been analyzed. Nesta says, who voted against me? And Cassian, the dumb, sweet baby boy, says, Rhys and Amren. Like, he could lie. He could be like, we took a vote, but, like, it was silly because we all voted. Yes, Nesta. Let's tell Nesta she is doing so well. We think she's so smart and brave and cool. She's actually the prettiest girl in all the land. Like, why lie a little? Cassian can't lie to save his life, though. I really, like, Nesta isn't that upset that Rhys voted against her because, like, again, Rhys and Nesta hate each other with the pits of their soul. One of their core pillars. I love to talk about a core pillar for these characters. And one of Nesta and Rhys's core pillars is that they hate each other. And I love that for them. But the fact that Amren voted against her, like, really, like, ooh, that guts Nesta in a particular way, because, like, she had really felt like Amren had seen kind of the depth of her power and this rage and this, like, the scariness inside of her. And I think Nesta is very scared by her powers. And Amren, she felt like Amren had seen that and understood her and was not afraid of her. But, like, clearly Amren is afraid of her. And Nesta just goes, I'm fine, I don't care, which is always her response when things are going poorly. She's like, I don't care. As a Nesta, love that response. That is also a personal favorite of mine when something is really, like, not going my way and I'm, like, very upset by it. I do love to hit him with the, I don't care. It's a good one. She, like, locks it all down and then she goes and joins Emerie and Gwyn. She made a show of rolling her shoulders, approaching Emerie and Gwyn, whose faces bunched with concern in a way Nesta knew she didn't deserve. In a way that she knew one day would vanish, when they too realized what a wretch she was. When they too realized what a wretch she was. When Amren told them what a pathetic waste of life she was. Or they heard it from someone else, and they ceased being her friends. She wondered if they'd even say it to her face, if they'd just disappear. Like, literally scoop my insides out with a spoon like I'm a pumpkin. This idea that Nesta, I think, was kind of starting to believe that, like, maybe she could get better. Like, maybe she could participate in the world in a way that didn't hurt everyone around her. And, like, hearing that Amren had voted against her and that they had felt the need for a vote in the first place to judge her, like, worthy of having this information, I think it makes her be like, okay, well, these people don't think I could get better. Like, why would I try? My little Bibby. And she's like, my friends are going to find out that I'm evil and then they're not going to be my friends anymore. Like, I'm doing a good job pretending I'm not evil, but, like, the truth will eventually come out. Upsetting. And Emerie's like, what's wrong? And Nesta just goes, nothing, night court business. And Gwyn's like, are you all right? And Nesta says yes. Nesta goes to her room after training. She knows Cassian's going to follow her, so she starts a bath. And he knocks on the door, and she's just, like, running the bath, ignoring him, and she waits a bit until she's pretty sure he's gone before turning off the water, and she asks the house if he's gone, and it opens the door and shows her the empty hallway, and then she heads for the stairs. Then and only then did she let her fury out. Then and only then did she drop that coldness and give herself over to the raging of her heart. Amren had deemed her so untrustworthy, so awful, that knowing she had this world-altering gift would be dangerous. Amren had spoken to the others about it, and they had voted on it. Nesta just keeps spiraling down and down and down. Amren had entirely given up on her. The debate about sending her up here had been different. Nesta knew that debate had been out of a desire to help her. She could acknowledge that now. This debate had been out of hatred and fear of her. And she, like, is just, like, thinking about how everyone in her life hates her and is afraid of her. If they know her, they hate her. That Amren has responded to that with fear, I think, just, like, really breaks Nesta in a particular way. And so she just, like, spirals down and down and down. She finally reaches the bottom step of the staircase and opens the door into the sunlight. Rage rippling like a storm around her, Nesta stepped back into Valaris at last. And Nesta literally doesn't even look at the city around her, doesn't take any of it in, as she storms over to Amren's loft. Later, she literally will not remember how she gets there, but she walks into Amren's loft, shattering the wards that are, like, up around Amren's room. Amren and Varian are, like, literally in bed together, and Nesta goes, You thought I shouldn't even be told what my power can do. Varian puts up a wall of water to protect them, but Amren is like, stop. And Nesta tells Varian to get out. And Varian looks over at Amren and she's like, you can go. And then it's just the two of them. And Amren puts on a robe and comes to, like, talk to Nesta. And Amren says, I suppose that loudmouth bastard told you more than was necessary. And Nesta goes, you voted against me. And Amren says, you have done nothing to prove that you were able to handle such a terrible power. On that barge, you told me as much when you walked away from any attempt at mastering it. I offered to teach you more, and you walked away. Nesta says, I walked away because you chose my sister. And Amren says, I didn't choose anyone. I told you that Feyre had requested you and I work together again. And somehow you twisted that into me siding with her. I told them to leave you alone for months. I refused to speak about you with them. And then the moment I realized my behavior was not helping you, that maybe your sister was right, I somehow betrayed you? And Nesta says, you know how I feel about Feyre. And Amren says, yes, poor Nesta, with a younger sister who loved her so dearly she was willing to do anything to get her help. Nesta blocked out that memory of Tamlin in his beast form, how she had wanted to rip him limb from limb. She was no better than him in the end. Feyre doesn't love me. She didn't deserve Feyre's love, just as Tamlin hadn't. And Amren says, that you believe that Feyre doesn't only proves that you are unworthy of that power. Anyone that can be that willfully blind cannot be trusted. You would be a walking nightmare with those weapons. And Nesta says, it's different now. And Amren says, no. You can train as hard as you want, sleep with Cassian as often as you want, but it isn't going to fix what is broken if you don't start reflecting. And Nesta says, do not preach at me. And she goes and she points at Amren. And Amren literally jumps out of the line of Nesta's finger. Nesta is like, you think I would mark you with a death promise? Like, Nesta is so, again, horrified that Amren is scared of her. You nearly did with Tamlin the other day, Amren says. This is a very different situation, but yeah. So Cassian had told them all about that too. But I'll say to you again what I said on that bar. I think you have powers that you do not understand, respect, or control. And Nesta says, you were my friend. And Amren says, was I? I don't think you know what that word means. Just on their steps that like come through the door, Nesta expects to see Cassian, but instead it is Feyre. It clearly, like covered in paint, she clearly like ran from her studio over here. Varian must have fetched her. And Feyre says, stop this, Nesta. It should not have come out as it did. And Nesta says, did Cassian tell you to say that? And Feyre says, no, but I can guess as much. He didn't want to keep anything from you. And then Nesta turns to Amren and says, my issue isn't with Cassian. I trusted you to have my back. Feyre tries to like stand between Nesta and Amren and like send Nesta back to House of Wind and like, you know, talk to Amren and them independently. But Nesta is like too pissed off at this point. Nesta says, you are her high lady. You don't need to cater to her, not when she has less power than any of you. And Feyre says, Amren is my friend and has been a member of this court for centuries. I offer her my respect. And Nesta is like, is it respect that she offers you? Is it respect that your mate offers you? And Amren says, cut the cameras. Nesta, don't say another word, Nesta Archeron. And Nesta says, have any of them told you, their respected high lady, that the babe in your womb will kill you? And Feyre's like, what do you mean? And Nesta says, the wings. The boy's Illyrian wings will get stuck in your fey body during the labor, and it will kill you both. Your mate ordered everyone not to inform you of the truth. And Nesta turns to Amren and says, did you all vote on that too? Did you talk about her, judge her, and deem her unworthy of the truth? What was your vote, Amren? To let Feyre die in ignorance? And then Nesta turns to Feyre. Didn't you question why your perfect, precious Rhysand has been a moody bastard for weeks? Because he knows you will die. He knows, and yet he still didn't tell you. And Feyre starts, like, freaking out. Because, like, honestly, it's a pretty traumatic way to find out that, like, you are gonna die. And she turns to Amren and she says, you knew all of this. And Amren says, we did not wish to alarm you. Fear can be as deadly as any physical threat. And Feyre says, Rhys knew about the threat to our lives. Feyre peered down at herself, at the tattooed hand cradling her abdomen, and Nesta knew that she had not once in her life been loved by her mother as much as Feyre already loved the boy growing within her. It broke something in Nesta, broke that rage, that roaring, seeing those tears begin to fall. The fear crumpling Feyre's paint-smeared face. She had gone too far. Nesta couldn't bear it. The pain and fear and love on Feyre's face as she caressed her stomach. Amren growled at Nesta. I hope you're content now. Nesta didn't respond, didn't know what to say or do with herself. She simply turned on her heel and ran from the apartment. This does make me, the line about, like, Feyre loving that baby more than Nesta had ever been loved in a single moment by her mother does make me cry. Also the fact that Nesta just, like, turns and leaves the apartment and just starts sprinting. We'll find out that she's just like literally running around Valaris in a minute. Just like it's funny to me. Okay, trauma, that's the Feyre stuff, traumatic. The fact that she's running, a little hee ha ha. Okay. Cassian's thinking through every single mistake he's made today, from asking about the sword's name to not busting into Nesta's bedroom and like insisting that they talk to assuming that Amren would be at the river house. He is at the river house. That's when Rhys gets a mental telephone call from Feyre, letting him know that Nesta told her she's gonna die. And Rhys goes, Cassian? Rhys's voice was a thing of nightmares, of the darkness between the stars. Cassian froze at that voice he had so rarely heard and never once directed at him. He goes, what happened? And Rhys goes, Nesta saw fit to inform Feyre of the risk to her and the babe. And he goes on to say, get Nesta out of this city right now before I kill her. And so Cassian goes, he finds Nesta, who's literally just like sprinting down the streets. Like I said, she gets out of Amren's place and she just starts running. Like, where's Girlie going? I don't know. She's just sprinting. He just like goes down and like scoops her. And then they fly over the House of Wind. Actually, okay, this is what the book says. I don't think she's just sprinting. The book implies that she's sprinting for a tavern. I like to think that Girlie is just running as fast as she can. She's just like, I like did a bad thing. I'm going to literally try to get as far away from it as physically possible. Cassian finds Nesta sprinting down the street as if she suspected that Rhys was about to set out on a hunt that only her spilled blood could halt. But he knew that she only ran from what she had done, ran from herself, ran towards one of the taverns she favored so much. He literally just picks her up and starts flying. Nesta doesn't fight him as she just like lays there limp in his arms. They fly up to the House of Wind. Azriel has like packed a bag for them and like passes it off. They don't even land. They just like pick it up from Azriel and then they keep flying. There were no sounds in her head, her body. She knew Cassian held her, knew they flew for hours and hours. She didn't care. She had done an unforgivable thing. She deserved to be turned into a bloody mist by Rhys, wished Cassian had not come to save her. They like land somewhere in the mountains, but it's like really late. Nesta can't see much. Cassian tells her they'll sleep there for the night. They're in the mountains, but it's like really dark out, so she like can't see anything. Cassian says, I'll make a fire. And Nesta notes that there's like not anything kind on his face. She finds a bit of flat ground and just like lays down and tries to ignore the like snapping and popping of the fire. Feyre calls Cassian on the mental telephone to check in with him and Nesta. She's like, hey, I'm so sorry, Rhys, like, overreacted. We're chill. If you want to bring Nesta back, like, feel free. Rhys will not murder her. And Cassian's like, I'm so sorry you had to learn of it. And Feyre's like, I'm not. I'm furious with all of you. I understand why you didn't tell me, but, like, I'm furious. And Cassian says, well, we're furious with Nesta. And Feyre says she had the courage to tell me the truth. Cassian says, she told you the truth to hurt you. And Feyre says, perhaps, but she was the only one who said anything. Cassian says, I think she saw the parallels between your situations and, in her own way, decided to avenge both of you. And Feyre says, that's my feeling too, though Rhys disagrees. I do think that's what happened. Like, Nesta she does it she lashes out to, like, hurt. And that's, like, part of it. It's, like, she definitely is, like, just wanting to hurt because she hurts, and so her impulse is to hurt the people around her. But I also think she does think it's like kind of unfair that these people continue to think that they know better than these Archeron girlies. And if she would have been a little bit more tactical, if she would have taken like a second to breathe, I think probably she still would have told Feyre, and maybe they could have teamed up against Rhys. You know, she really could have gotten Feyre a little bit more on Team Nesta if she had been like a little more tactical in her explanation to Feyre and did it a little bit more gently rather than just like meanly. Anyway, Cassian says to Feyre, still in the mental telly, I wish you'd find out a different way. And Feyre says, well, I didn't, but we'll face it together, all of us. Cassian says, how can you be so calm about this? And Feyre says, the alternative is fear and panic. I will not let my son feel those things. I will fight for him, for us, until I no longer can. Cassian says, we'll fight for you too. Feyre says, I know. Rhys had no right to chase you from the city or to threaten Nesta. He has realized that and has apologized. I want you both to come back home. Both of you. Where did you even head off to? Cassian explains that they're like in the middle of nowhere, and he's like, I actually think it'd be good for us to stay out here for a few days. We're just gonna hike. Feyre's like, Nesta has never been on a hike in her life. I guarantee she will hate it. And Cassian says, well, then tell Rhys this is her punishment. And Feyre says, Rhys says that he supposes that it's unnecessary, but to tell you that he's secretly delighted. And Cassian says, good, I am secretly glad to hear that. Feyre laughs, and Cassian is, like, really grateful to hear that laugh and to know that, like, she's okay. Like, she's heard this news and she's coping with it. Like, it hasn't wrecked her. Like, she's still able to laugh. And Feyre says, please take care of her, Cassian, and yourself. And Cassian says, I will. In the morning, Cassian wakes up Nesta at dawn, gives her breakfast. She'd barely slept between the sounds of the fire and like the guilt and the fact that she's just like lying on the cold ground. Cassian explains that they'll be hiking all day and only making a couple stops along the way, so she like needs to eat something now. He packs up their little camp and then passes her the backpack because he can't hike with the backpack on because of his wings. Nesta goes and like pees around the corner, and then Cassian tells her to pick up the pack, which is like really effing heavy, and then they start walking. They're hiking all day, Cassian in the front and Nesta in the back. She's like out of breath and exhausted and like shaking almost immediately. And she's thinking about, they're like hiking on these like mountain trails, and a lot of times she's thinking about how if she were to slip, she would just like tumble all the way down to the bottom of these mountains, and she's thinking about how she like doesn't care. Nesta is like really not doing well. They stop for lunch at a river, and Nesta literally collapses on the ground as she drinks from the river. And Cassian says, "You have 30 minutes. Use it how you wish." Cassian tosses her the canteen. "Fill this. If you faint, you might fall off the mountain and break every bone in your body." She didn't look at him. Let him see the word in her eyes. Good. He went still, though. His next words were gentler. She resented them, too. "Rest up." It's a similar moment in Mist and Fury in which, like, Rhys catches on to the fact that Feyre is like fine with dying. That like wrecks me. In this moment too, in which she's like, I like deserve to break every bone in my body. She doesn't have like an ounce of self-preservation left. Cassian knew that Nesta often hated herself, but he'd never known that she'd hated herself enough to not want to exist anymore. He'd seen her expression when he mentioned the threat of falling, and he knew that going back to Valeris wouldn't save her from that look. He couldn't save her from that look either. Only Nesta could save herself from that feeling. We've got to face the wolves. We've kind of like tiptoed around it, that like Nesta is like a lot of the like training and the work she is doing is just like getting her to a place in which she can face these like demons inside of her, the wolves that are around her, and we're getting there. Cassian's gonna like essentially break her. This is in a good way. He's going to make sure she confronts those wolves, and so they keep hiking. Cassian comments that Mor had once told him that these lands had been used for healing. Maybe subconsciously that's why he brought Nesta here. They hike all afternoon before Cassian sets up camp again. Nesta is so exhausted she collapses to the ground with the pack still on her back, and Cassian is like, "Take off the pack before you fall asleep so I can at least cook dinner." Cassian's still being like super like cold and hostile to Nesta, and Nesta knows that like, she deserves that. She does not deserve any softness because like she has done a thing that was very, very unkind and not cool. She falls asleep pretty quickly, and when she wakes, Cassian is asleep a few feet away, but he's like made her a plate for dinner and like left it there for her. For the next 2 days, she like stares at the back of Cassian's head as they hike. For the next 2 days, she did not speak. They hadn't actually covered that many mountains, and she's like not sure where they're going. It seems to be kind of like this endless stretch of wilderness. As she's watching the back of his head and walking, Nesta realizes that his head is starting to go a little bit blurry, and her tongue is sticking to the roof of her mouth, and she realizes that she hasn't had water in a long time, and she can't reach her canteen without stopping, and she doesn't want to like stop Cassian to ask for a drink. She hasn't spoken in 2 days. Like, now is not the time she's going to stop and ask. She's a stubborn thing, if nothing else. She had been exhausted and passing out every night, and so in pain that during the day that she's like not thinking about how terrible she is, and she winds up collapsing because she's like a little bit dehydrated. Cassian hears Nesta fall, and he turns to find her face down in the dirt. He kneels down next to her to see that like she's fainted and looks terrible. He hadn't looked at her in hours, and he like until there's like absolutely no color in her face. She's like falling apart. Her lips are cracked and dry. He gives her water. When she comes to, Cassian says, "When is the last time you had water? You should have been drinking water throughout the day." And she just like stares at the rocks around her. He couldn't stand that look, the vacancy, the indifference, as if she no longer really cared whether she lived or died out here in the wild. He wants to like comfort her. Cassian's like instinct is to like comfort her and soothe her and coddle her, but something inside of him tells her that they like need to keep going, just one more mountain, and that like Nesta won't respond well to that like that softness in this moment. Like, that's not what she needs. She needs to kind of like be allowed to kind of like work through the rage. Like, honestly, we're still burning the rage off. We are multiple days into this situation, and we're still burning off rage, you know? And she needs to burn off all the rage before she can get the softness. Cassian's like, "We'll camp here just a few more feet and then you can sleep." And when Nesta like literally can't get up, he just like scoops her up and carries her to where they're gonna camp for the night. Nesta wakes up and again finds a plate waiting for her in the dark, but the moon is bright enough that she can see kind of the surrounding landscape tonight. She was nothing before that view, these mountains, as insignificant to any of it as one of those stones that still rattled in her boot. It was a blessing, a relief to be nothing and no one. Dawn breaks and they start hiking again, and Cassian tells her they're going to reach a lake today and spend a couple of days there. The mountains watched her. The river sang to her, as if guiding her onward to that lake. No amount of driving her body into the earth would make her good. She knew it. No amount of driving her body into that earth would make her good. She knew it. Wondered if he did too. Wondered if he thought he was trekking out here with her on a fool's errand. Or maybe it was like one of those ancient stories she had heard as a child. He, a wicked queen's huntsman, leading her out deep into the wild before carving out her heart. She wished he would. Wish someone would cut the damn thing from her chest. Wish someone would smother the voice that whispered of every horrible thing she'd ever done, every awful thought she'd ever had, every person she'd failed. She had been born wrong, had been born with claws and fangs, and had never been able to keep from using them. Never been able to quell the part of her that roared at the betrayal, that could hate and love more violently than anyone had ever understood. Elaine had been the only one who had perhaps grasped it, but now her sister loathed her. She didn't know how to fix it, how to make any of it right, how to stop being this way. She couldn't quell that relentless, churning anger, couldn't stop herself from lashing out before she could be wounded. She was no better than a rabid dog. She had been a rabid dog with Amren and Feyre, a beast exactly like Tamlin. She hadn't even cared that she had made it down the house stairs at last. Did it count when she was driven by fury? Did she count? Was she even worth being counted? It was that question that sent everything crumpling inside of her. Me too. Oh my gosh, that took me forever to read. I'm sure I will cut it to be like normal, but I had to pause and cry a couple times. They reach the lake, and Nesta just falls to her knees in front of the lake and starts weeping. She lets all the terrible things that she's done wash over her. Feyre's face when she told her. Cassian's next to her, and he just says, "I'm here." And Nesta's crying even harder at the fact that she's done all of these terrible things, and Cassian, who is so good, is just she's done all of these terrible things, and Cassian is still here, that he's still standing next to her. He is so good. He's here, even though she is so terrible. Cassian goes, "Nesta." He tries to touch her shoulder, but she can't bear his kindness, and she says, "Please, don't touch me. Don't be kind to me." Cassian says, "Why?" And Nesta says, "I let him die. He came to save me and fought for me, and I let him die with hate in my heart. Hate for him. He died because I didn't stop it. And I was so horrid to him until the very end. I was so horrid to him all of my life, and he still somehow loved me, and I didn't deserve it, but he did, and I let him die. I can't do it. I can't undo it. I can't fix it. I can't fix that he is dead. I can't fix what I said to Feyre. I can't fix any of the horrible things I've done. I can't fix me, and I can't bear it." Okay. Cassian goes, "It isn't your fault. Your father's death is not your fault. I was there, Nesta. I looked for a way out of it too, and there was nothing that could have been done." And Nesta says, "I could have used my powers. I could have tried." And Cassian just pulls her onto his lap. He goes, "Nesta." And Nesta says, "I could have found a way. I should have found a way." And he just holds her and pets her hair. And Nesta explains to him that her father's death is the reason that she can't stand fires. The sound of the logs popping sound like breaking bones. She's "I don't know if I'll ever be able to be near a fire and not hear his neck snapping." She's "It is torture whenever I'm near one." And Nesta says, "I should have found a way to save us before then, save Elaine and Feyre when we were poor, but I was so angry, and I wanted him to try, to fight for us, but he didn't. And I would have let us all starve to prove what a wretch he was. It consumed me so much that I let Feyre go into that forest and told myself I didn't care. That she was half wild and it didn't matter, and yet I close my eyes and I see her that day she went out to hunt for the first time. I see Elaine going into the cauldron. I see her taken by it during the war. I see my father dead, and now I see Feyre's face when I told her that baby would kill her. I hate it," she said. "Every part of me that does these things, and yet I can't stop it. I can't let down that barrier because if I let it fall, to let everything in, this is what would happen. This shrieking, weeping mess she'd become. I can't bear to be in my head. I can't bear to hear and see everything over and over. That is all I hear, the snapping of his neck, his last words to me, that he loved me. I didn't deserve his love. I deserve nothing." And she's weeping into Cassian's chest, and Cassian starts to talk about how his mother and how he had failed her, and how he had failed Rhys with Amarantha, and how many people that he has killed. He goes on to say, "I can tell you how I hear Eris and Devlin and the others talk. And deep down, I still believe that I am a worthless bastard brute, and that it doesn't matter how many siphons I have or how many battles I've won, because I've failed the two people dearest to me. Because I have failed the two people dearest to me when it mattered the most. But I'm not going to tell you all of that. I'm going to tell you that you will get through this, that you will face all of this and you will get through it, that these tears are good, Nesta. These tears mean that you care. I'm going to tell you that it is not too late, not for any of it. And I can't tell you when or how, but it will get better. What you feel, this guilt and pain and self-loathing, you will get through it, but only if you are willing to fight. Only if you are willing to face it and embrace it and walk through it to emerge on the other side of it. And maybe you will still feel that tinge of pain, but there is another side, a better side. And Nesta says, I don't think I am capable of it. And Cassian says, you are. I've seen it. I've seen what you can do when you are willing to fight for the people that you love. Why not apply that same bravery and loyalty to yourself? Don't say you don't deserve it. Everyone deserves happiness. The road there isn't easy. It is long and hard and often traveled utterly blind. But you keep going because you know the destination will be worthwhile. Apologize to who you feel the need to, but leave those things behind. Nesta says forgiveness is not that easy. Cassian says forgiveness is something we also grant ourselves. And I can talk to you until these mountains crumble around us, but if you don't wish to be forgiven, if you don't want to stop feeling this way, it won't happen. You don't need to become some impossible ideal. You don't need to become sweet and simpering. You can give everyone that I will slay my enemies look, which is my favorite look, by the way. You can keep that sharpness I like so much, that boldness, that fearlessness. I don't want you to ever lose those things, to cage yourself. And Nesta says, but I still don't know how to fix myself. And Cassian says, there is nothing broken to be fixed. You are helping yourself, healing the parts of you that hurt too much and perhaps hurt others too. I will be with you every step of the way. Just don't lock me out. You want to walk in silence for a week? I'm fine with that, as long as you talk to me at the end of it. And Nesta says, thank you. And then Cassian's sitting with her, and he's thinking about like how horrible that fire thing must have been for her, and how every night that they've been out here hiking, they've obviously ended the night with a fire. And he thinks about how that solstice night she had spent the whole night like cowering from that like huge fire that they had had in the middle of the room. She had been suffering, and he had no idea how much of it consumed every facet of her life. He had seen her self-loathing and her anger, but hadn't realized how much she'd been aware of it, how much it had eaten her up. He couldn't stomach it. To know how much she'd hurt for so long. They just kind of like lay there together for a long time. Nesta like cries herself out. And then the moon starts to rise above them. And Cassian gets out his sword and has Nesta, eyes still puffy with tears, go through the 8-pointed star of their sword practice. And she executes it perfectly. Nesta finished the 8th maneuver and returned the sword to center. The light in her eyes shone brighter than the moon overhead. Such light and clarity that he could only whisper, again. With a soft smile that Cassian had never seen before, standing on the moon-washed shores of the lake, Nesta began. That part will get me every time. Literally, I like sob through this section of the book. I'm sure I'll cut it together to like make it a little bit more clean. But I like sobbed through, I like cried pretty hard while like talking to you about it, but I sob every time I read that section. I hope you're enjoying weeping alongside me. I love Silver Flame so much. I love Nesta so much. Love their little hiking trip together. Okay. Thanks for watching. Subscribe if you haven't already. Obviously, you gotta keep watching. You can't just end things here. There's so much more book to get to. We have to have a sleepover. We have to have friendship bracelets. We have sleepovers coming up. We have more Cassian and Nesta time. We have to deal with Feyre back home. Maybe Rhys. We've got stuff to do. So obviously you have to come back. Okay, I will see you in the next video. Have a gorgeous rest of your day. Bye.